The night Mara Vasquez watched a man die, she was supposed to be somewhere else entirely. She was supposed to be at her sister's birthday dinner on the east side of Chicago, sitting in a booth at that cramped Italian place on Wabash that smelled of garlic and old wood, and the specific kind of warmth that only family dinners can produce. She was supposed to be rolling her eyes at her brother-in-law's jokes and stealing sips of her sister Elena's wine. She was supposed to be anywhere but the Meridian nightclub at 11:47 on a Thursday night, standing in a corridor she had no business being in, watching two men argue in voices too low and too dangerous to belong to ordinary conversation. But the event coordinator job paid her rent, and the Meridian had needed someone to oversee the corporate gala on short notice, and Mara had said yes, the way she always said yes, because the money was right and the timing was bad, and she had never quite learned to put herself first. She had only gone back to the service corridor to find the catering manager about a dietary restriction situation at table 7. It was the most mundane errand in the world. A question about a gluten allergy. That was all. Instead, she found two men she didn't recognize, and one man she did. District Attorney Raymond Holt stood with his back against the wall of exposed brick, his expensive suit jacket catching the dim blue light that seeped in from the club floor beyond. He was sweating in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Mara had seen Holt on the news a dozen times. His face was built for television, all jaw and silver confidence. But right now, that face was broken open with fear, and it made him look like a stranger. The two men standing in front of him were not on television. They were the kind of men who didn't need to be. One was broad-shouldered, with a tattoo climbing the side of his neck, the other thin and still in the way that still things often conceal a very sudden kind of violence. The thin man was holding something in his right hand. Mara registered it before she registered anything else. A gun. She pressed herself back into the shadow of the doorframe, and she was very careful and very quiet, and she told herself that if she stayed completely still, they would not see her, and she could simply back away and pretend she had seen nothing, and that would be the end of it, and she would never work another late event again. Then Raymond Holt said something, a plea, she thought, something desperate and trembling, and the thin man raised the gun and shot him once in the chest. The sound in that narrow corridor was enormous. It swallowed everything. Mara felt it in her sternum before she heard it, a physical fact. And she must have made a noise because the thin man's head turned toward the doorway, toward the shadow where she stood, and his eyes found her. She ran. The details of the next 4 minutes existed in her memory afterward as a series of broken images rather than a continuous sequence. The blur of the service exit, cold November air hitting her face, the alley behind the club with its overflowing dumpsters and a single yellow light, her heels on wet pavement, one of them snapping off a block from the street, a taxi with its light on and her hand slamming against the window and the driver's startled face. She didn't go to the police immediately. She told herself this was rational. She needed to think. She needed to understand what she had seen and what it meant, and who those men were. Because the thin man had looked at her with a recognition that was worse than anger. It was the kind of look that assessed value, measured risk, made a calculation. She had been added to a column in some ledger she didn't understand. She went home instead. She locked the door. She sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and her broken heel in her hand, and she stared at the wall and thought about Raymond Holt's face in the moment before the shot. How he had looked like a man who had always known this was coming and had simply run out of time to outrun it. By 2 in the morning, she had convinced herself she had no choice. She called 911. By 3, she was in a precinct interview room with 2 detectives who took her statement twice and watched her with expressions she couldn't read. By 4, a third man had entered the room, older, quieter, with a federal badge that he showed her without flourish. His name was Agent Calloway, and he had the careful eyes of someone who had spent years managing the distance between dangerous information and the people who carried it. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, sitting across from her, "I need you to understand what you've walked into." "I didn't walk into anything," she said. "I was looking for a catering manager." He acknowledged this with a slight nod that suggested the distinction didn't matter much. "The men you saw tonight, we've been building a case against them for 3 years. You are now, whether you chose it or not, the only living witness to a murder that could bring down an entire organization." She looked at him steadily. "I want protection." "That's what I'm here to discuss." He folded his hands on the table. His voice was even, measured, the voice of someone delivering difficult information for the 100th time. "Standard witness protection would take time we don't have. These men have eyes in the department, eyes in the courts. We found out tonight that they have eyes in the U.S. Marshal's office too." A pause. "We need somewhere they won't look." "Where?" she asked. He hesitated for exactly 1 second, a hesitation she catalogued and did not forget. "Somewhere inside their world," he said. She stared at him. "I know how that sounds," he said. "I don't think you do," she said quietly. But she listened, because she was a woman who had run out of choices in the time it took a bullet to cross a corridor, and listening was all she had left. By 6 in the morning, with the sky outside the precinct windows going the particular grey-pink of a Chicago dawn, Agent Calloway explained to her that there was a man who operated on the other side of every line that mattered, a man whose penthouse sat 40 stories above the city, and whose name was spoken in certain circles with a particular quality of silence, who owed the federal government a favor so significant that they had decided to collect it now. His name was Nico Valenti, and for reasons she was not yet told, he had agreed to keep her alive. They drove her across the city before the sun fully rose, and Mara watched Chicago slide past the tinted windows of the black SUV, with the feeling of someone watching a life she recognized become gradually unfamiliar. The streets she knew, the coffee shop where she got her Americano, the corner where she sometimes caught the train, the bookstore she browsed on Saturdays, receded behind her like a sentence she had started and was no longer allowed to finish. Agent Calloway sat beside her in the back seat. He had given her a phone, new, untraceable, with only his number saved in it, and a black bag containing clothes that were not hers. Practical things, neatly folded, purchased in a size that was close enough. She had not been allowed to go home. Home was now a place where the thin man might be standing in the kitchen when she walked through the door, and this thought sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't dislodge. "Tell me about him," she said, as the SUV turned north. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Outside, the lake was beginning to show itself between buildings, that flat, grey expanse that always made the city feel like it existed at the edge of something. "Nico Valenti," he said carefully. 41 years old. Born in Chicago, educated in Milan. His father was Enzo Valenti. You may have heard the name. She had, vaguely. The name attached to newspaper headlines she had always turned past because they belonged to a world she had no interest in. "Enzo died 6 years ago," Calloway continued. "Nico took over He's different from his father. More controlled, more careful. He paused. More dangerous. More dangerous how? Enzo Valenti was brutal. He ruled through fear and spectacle. Nico rules through architecture. He understands systems, legal systems, financial systems, social systems. He has interests in legitimate businesses across 15 industries. He funds charities. He attends gallery openings. Another pause. And he controls the most significant criminal organization in the Midwest. Mara absorbed this. Why would he agree to shelter a witness against the Caruso family? Because the Carusos are his competitors, and because we have something he wants. Calloway looked at the window rather than at her. We're not here to answer your questions about the arrangement. We're here to keep you alive. Right, she said flatly. The building they pulled up to was not what she expected, which was irrational. She had no experience with what to expect. It was a tower of dark glass and steel on the edge of River North, the kind of building that announced itself without trying, the kind of building that made you aware of what it cost to be inside it. There was no visible security from the street, but she felt it anyway. That particular density in the air around structures that protect things of value. A man met them at the private entrance, young, dark-suited, with the economical movements of someone trained to stand in rooms and be invisible unless needed. He acknowledged Calloway with a nod that contained nothing, and he looked at Mara with an expression so neutral it was its own kind of assessment. Mr. Valenti is expecting you, he said. His name, she would later learn, was Leo. He was Nico's assistant, and he moved through the world like a sentence with no unnecessary words. The elevator was all mirrors and dark wood and a specific quality of silence. Mara watched her own reflection, her event coordinator's black dress, her broken heel she'd left in the car, her bare feet on marble, and thought she looked like someone who had wandered onto the wrong stage. She straightened her spine deliberately, because that was the thing she had always done when she was afraid. Her mother had taught her that. Chin up, shoulders back. Fear is information, not instruction. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. She registered space first, the scale of it, the height of the ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped the entire south and west face of the building and turned the Chicago skyline into wallpaper. The light at this hour was pale and precise, falling across surfaces that were expensive in the way that some things are expensive not because they show it, but because they don't have to. Dark leather, raw stone, art on the walls that she suspected was not reproductions. Then she registered him. He was standing with his back to her at the western window, looking out at the city with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, and he was very still, in the way that powerful things are still. Not because they have nowhere to go, but because they have chosen not to go there yet. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit in a shade of deep charcoal that looked like it had been constructed rather than tailored. She could see the line of his jaw in profile, the set of his shoulders. He turned. Nico Valenti's face was the kind of face that made you recalibrate. It was sharp-boned and composed, and his eyes, dark, the colour of old amber, something between brown and black, moved to her with the particular quality of attention that she immediately understood was not casual. Nothing about this man was casual. Every gesture was chosen. Every silence had weight. He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than convention required, and then he looked at Calloway. "Agent," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, Italian accented in the way of a language that lived just beneath English and occasionally surfaced. "You're late." "Traffic," Calloway said. The corner of Nico Valenti's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more the ghost of one. "Leave us." Calloway looked at Mara. She gave him a very small nod because she refused to show this man any uncertainty she could suppress, and Calloway left. The elevator closed. The room contracted slightly without the buffer of another person. Nico Valenti crossed toward her. Not fast, not slow, with the measured pace of someone who understood that the approach was its own kind of statement. He stopped at a distance that was formal but not comfortable. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, analytically, completely, without pretense of disinterest. "Mara Vasquez," he said. "Yes," she said. "You saw something you were not supposed to see. That seems to be the consensus." His eyes moved across her face. "Are you frightened?" She held his gaze. "Yes." Something shifted in his expression, so small she might have imagined it, but she didn't think she did. Something that looked almost like respect. "Good," he said. "Frightened people are careful. Careful people sometimes survive." "And people who aren't frightened?" "They become useful in other ways," he said quietly. He turned away from her then, moved back toward the windows. "Leo will show you to your room. You'll have everything you need. You will not leave this building without my knowledge. You will not contact anyone outside the number Calloway gave you. You will follow my instructions." She stood in the middle of the enormous room with her bare feet on his stone floor and her broken heel somewhere in a federal SUV, and 24 hours of terror sitting in her chest. And she looked at his back at the window. "And if I refuse?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then you become a woman who saw something she wasn't supposed to see," he said, "in a city full of people who would very much like to resolve that problem. And I become someone who couldn't help you." He said it without threat. That was the thing. He said it as fact, the way you state the temperature or the time. And she understood that the most frightening thing about Nico Valenti was not what he might do to her. It was that he was, right now, the only thing between her and the men who would. "Thank you," she said, because there was nothing else to say. He turned his head slightly, not enough to look at her, just enough to acknowledge that he had heard. The room they gave her was nothing like a cage. This was the first thing Mara noticed, and it unsettled her in ways she couldn't immediately name. She had expected something sterile, a guest room with all the warmth removed, functional without invitation, a place designed to contain rather than welcome. Instead, the room was beautiful in a quiet, considered way. The bed was large and dressed in linens the colour of cream, and there were books on the nightstand that were not decorative. They were worn, red, their spines broken in the way of books that have been lived with. The window faced east toward the lake, and the light that came through it in the morning was honest and clean. There was a desk, fresh flowers, dark dahlias, burgundy, nearly black, in a vase on the windowsill. A wardrobe with more clothes, better fitted than the ones in Calloway's bag, hanging neatly inside. She ran her fingers along the sleeve of a silk blouse and thought about what it meant that someone had selected these, had anticipated her size, her colouring, had bothered. Leo showed her the bathroom, the location of various things, the single rule about the north corridor. She was not to go there, and he said it politely but with the finality of a wall. He asked if she needed anything. She said she needed coffee and information, in roughly that order. He produced the coffee within 10 minutes. The information, he said, would depend on Mr. Valenti. She spent the first day learning the shape of her confinement. The penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor, and she was permitted the living spaces, the main room with its windows and its art, and its fireplace that looked original to some earlier version of the building, the kitchen, which was extraordinary and clearly designed for someone who actually cooked, a library, a real one, floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls that made her stop in the doorway and simply look for a moment. Something loosening in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. A gym, a terrace on the south face, enclosed in glass, where the wind was audible but not felt, and where the city spread out below like a circuit board lit from within. What she did not see: Nico Valenti. He was in the building. She knew this the way you know certain things about spaces, the particular fullness of them. But he did not appear. Leo brought her meals and answered her questions in measured, careful sentences that gave information without texture. She ate at the kitchen island and read from the library, and stood at the terrace glass and watched the city she had been extracted from, going about its ordinary life. And she felt like someone watching a film of her own existence from a row behind. On the second day, she found the piano. It was in a room she had initially thought was a second library, a smaller room off the main space with heavy curtains drawn across the only window. She had pushed the door open without thinking, following the logic of the space, and there it was. A grand piano in a dark room, its surface catching the sliver of light from the corridor. Beautiful and enormous and absolutely still. She almost closed the door. The piano was clearly not hers to touch. But she sat down on the bench anyway, slowly, as if the room might object, and rested her fingers on the keys without pressing them. She had played since she was 7. Her mother had insisted. She had resented it at 8, and loved it by 12, and played through every difficult thing since then. And sitting here, with her hands poised above this instrument in the dark, she felt the specific comfort of something that had always been hers, even in borrowed spaces. She played something quiet, something she had known for so long it lived in her hands rather than her mind. Chopin, the Nocturne in B-flat minor, which her mother had called the one that sounds like 3 a.m., and which was, in Mara's experience, accurate. She didn't hear him come in. She only realized she was not alone when she reached the end of the first movement, and the silence that followed it was different from the silence that had preceded it. Fuller. She turned. Nico Valenti stood in the doorway with his jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, a glass of something amber in his right hand. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not the analytical assessment of their first meeting, not professional or calculated. Something quieter and more involuntary than that. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I should have asked." "No," he said. She waited. "Don't apologize," he said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the piano rather than at her now, with an expression that was private enough that she felt she was witnessing something she wasn't meant to. "My mother played that piece." She didn't know what to say. She said nothing, which felt right. He looked at her then, a direct, unguarded look that lasted only a second before the architecture of his composure rebuilt itself. He raised his glass slightly, not a toast exactly, more an acknowledgement, and turned back to the corridor. "Play as long as you like," he said. She did. She played for an hour, and when she finally stopped and the penthouse was quiet again, she sat in the dark room and thought about the look on his face in the doorway. That second of unguarded something, and about the particular way that confined spaces have of accelerating the ordinary business of learning another person. She was not foolish enough to think she knew him. She was not foolish enough to forget what he was. But she noted, with the careful honesty she tried to bring to most things, that he had surprised her. On the third day, he came to find her in the library. She was deep in a chair, with her knees up and a novel open, and she looked up to find him in the doorway. And the sight of him, the specific, composed, precise physicality of him, the dark eyes already on her before she noticed him, registered in her body before her mind caught up with it. She resented this. She acknowledged it and resented it simultaneously, and arranged her expression into something neutral. "You read Calvino?" he said, looking at the novel. "You stocked the library," she said. "I did." He came in, not hurried. He looked at the shelves with an ease that told her this was a room he used. He ran a finger along a row of spines absently, the gesture automatic, something done 1,000 times. "How are you finding it here?" "I'm finding it." She paused. "I'm not finding it very well." "Because you're confined?" "Because I don't understand anything." She kept her voice even. "I don't know who these people are. I don't know what the investigation looks like. I don't know how long I'm here. I don't know what you're getting out of this arrangement." He looked at her steadily. "You don't need to know all of that." "I disagree," she said. "I'm not a package you're storing. I'm a person who needs to make decisions, and I can't make them without information." A long pause. He was looking at her with that quality of attention that she was beginning to understand was not impersonal, but was not warm. It was simply complete. He paid complete attention. It was both unsettling and, if she was being honest with herself, not entirely unpleasant. "The Caruso family," he said, finally, "believes you died in a car accident last night." She stared at him. "Calloway arranged it. Enough detail to be convincing, not enough to survive legal scrutiny for long." He pulled a book from the shelf, turned it in his hands without opening it. "You have, perhaps, 3 weeks before someone looks closely enough to doubt it. During those 3 weeks, the federal case needs to move far enough that your testimony can be given under conditions that don't require you to be invisible." "And if it doesn't move fast enough?" He replaced the book. "Then we adjust." "What does adjust mean?" He looked at her with something in his eyes that was, she thought, the nearest thing to honesty he had yet offered her. "It means I find another way to keep you safe," he said. She studied him. The specific quality of his stillness, the way the words sat in the room between them after he said them. "Why?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, the answer was precise and partial, and she knew it. But she also knew it was the most she was going to get right now. "Because I agreed to," he said. He left. She sat in the library, with the Calvino open on her knees and the question hanging in the air. And she thought about the way he had said it. "I find another way to keep you safe." With the particular flatness of someone stating something they had already decided. She told herself this was purely practical for him. She told herself it firmly, twice, and then went back to her book. On the 5th day, he invited her to dinner. Leo delivered the message with his characteristic efficiency. Mr. Valenti would like you to join him for dinner this evening at 8, if it suits you. And Mara held the neutrality of her expression with the effort of someone who refuses to let anything suit them more than it should. Fine, she said. She spent the hour before 8 doing the things she had always done before situations that required composure. Showering, choosing clothes carefully, a dark green dress from the wardrobe that she suspected cost more than her rent, allowing herself the small ritual of lipstick as armor. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and had a very direct, very private conversation with herself about the exact category of feeling she was managing, and the conversation ended with a firm resolution that she was not going to be stupid, she was not going to be naive, and she was going to remember at all times who this man was and what this situation was. Then she went to dinner. The table was set in the main room, near the windows, and whoever had arranged it understood that ambience was not about abundance, but about intention. 2 places, candles, wine already poured, a red she didn't recognize, but which smelled like smoke and dark fruit, and the specific pleasure of something chosen rather than grabbed. The lights of the city below had come on fully now, and Chicago at night, from 40 floors up, was a thing of baroque, impersonal beauty. Nico was already at the table when she arrived. He stood when she entered the room, a gesture so automatic and old-fashioned that she nearly stopped walking. He looked at her, and she watched him take in the green dress with an expression that moved through something and then resettled into composure. And she filed this away with all the other things she was filing. "Sit," he said. "Thank you," she said, "for inviting me." "You've been confined for 5 days. It seemed discourteous." "You have a sense of courtesy," she said, sitting across from him. "I wasn't sure." The corner of his mouth, that ghost. "You've been forming opinions." "You've been leaving me a lot of time to think." He poured water into her glass from a carafe, the gesture oddly domestic in a man who was so systematically extraordinary. He sat back in his chair and looked at her across the table with that complete attention. "Ask me something," he said. She looked at him. "Anything?" "Within reason." "I'll be the judge of reason," she said, because she had decided in the elevator that she was not going to perform meekness for this man. Something told her he would not respect it. He accepted this with a slight incline of his head. "Why Chicago?" she asked. "Your family is from—" "Genoa," he said. "My grandfather came here in 1961. Certain opportunities." He said the word with a self-awareness that was almost dry. "I was born here. I went to Milan for school. I came back because this is my city." "Do you love it?" He considered this. "I respect it. I understand it." A pause. "Love is a word that implies vulnerability to loss. I prefer—" He stopped, started again. "I am committed to it." She smiled slightly. "That sounds like something a politician would say." "Politicians say it to mask the absence of feeling," he said. "I say it because I've chosen commitment over feeling when the two conflict." She turned her wineglass in her fingers. "How often do they conflict?" "More than I'd prefer." The food came. Leo appeared and disappeared with the fluency of a man who understood when he was peripheral, and it was extraordinary. Pasta first, something she'd never had before, with a sauce that tasted like it had been built over hours. Then fish, simply prepared, with herbs. She ate, and it was one of the first genuine pleasures she had experienced in 5 days. the animal comfort of extraordinary food, and she was honest enough to show it. "You cook?" she asked. "Not tonight," he said. "There's a kitchen staff for occasions." He was watching her eat with something on his face that she might have called warmth in anyone else, but which, in him, seemed to require a different word. Attention. Pleasure taken in another person's pleasure. "Tell me something true," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "About yourself," she said. "Something true that you don't usually tell people." The quality of the silence that followed was interesting. Not defensive, not evasive, but genuinely considering. "I haven't slept well in 4 years," he said. She waited. "Since my father died," he said, and there was a specific texture to the word "died" that she recognized. The texture of things not said. "I inherited everything. The business, the alliances, all of it." He looked at the city beyond the glass. Sleep became a kind of surrender. I stopped trusting it. "That sounds exhausting," she said without irony. "It is." He looked back at her. "Your turn." "I didn't agree to reciprocal disclosures." "Consider it the price of the fish," he said. She laughed, genuine and sudden, and she was aware of the specific texture of that. The first time she had laughed in 5 days, and the first time she had laughed in front of him at all. And the way his eyes changed when it happened. Something moving in them that was quick and then contained. "I'm afraid of becoming someone I don't recognize," she said. "I've had versions of that fear my whole life. The fear that something could happen to me that would make me a stranger to myself." She looked at her wine. "Watching that man die. I keep waiting to find out who I am afterward." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, it was carefully. "I can tell you who you are now," he said, "without knowing who you were before. You're someone who is afraid and doesn't let it hollow her out. You're someone who asks good questions and listens to the answers." He paused. "That doesn't change because of what you witnessed." She looked at him across the table and felt something she didn't want to name. Something that was tangled up with gratitude and danger and the specific vulnerability of being seen clearly by someone whose eyes you had every reason to distrust. "You're surprisingly kind for someone in your profession," she said. "I'm not kind," he said. "I'm honest." A beat. "There's a difference." They sat by the windows until midnight. They talked about books, about cities, about the specific way Chicago changed between seasons, about her sister, Elena, about music. He did not volunteer things easily, but he answered her questions without evasion when she asked them, and she found herself asking more than she had intended. When she finally said goodnight and walked to her room, she stood in the doorway for a moment and thought about all the things she had filed away in the last 2 hours, and about the image of him at the table with the city behind him, composed and precise, and briefly, just briefly, something she didn't have a word for yet. She went to bed and did not sleep for a long time. A week into her captivity, she stopped calling it that internally by the 2nd week, though she noted the stopping and found it significant. Mara developed a routine. Morning coffee on the terrace, alone with the lake and the cold glass between them. An hour with the library. Midday in the gym because her body needed something to do with its anxiety. The piano in the afternoon, which she had stopped asking permission for. And in the evenings, with increasing frequency, Nico. He was not always there. He left the building for hours at a time, and on those days, the penthouse had a different quality. like a room where music has just stopped, still carrying the echo of something. She noticed his absence, the way you notice changed air pressure, and she resented noticing. She managed the resentment by reading and by playing the piano, and by reminding herself, with diminishing frequency, what he was. On the days he was there, she became aware of the particular geography of sharing space with him. He worked in a room off the north corridor, the corridor she was not to enter, and she could sometimes hear his voice in the low, deliberate tones of someone on a phone call, managing things she would not want to know the details of. He had a study, too, adjacent to the library, and she would occasionally pass its open door and catch a glimpse of him, jacket off, papers spread on the desk, reading something with the focused concentration of someone who believed that every problem had a solution if you looked at it carefully enough. He did not explain himself. He did not account for his movements. She did not ask. This was its own kind of arrangement, and she was surprised to find that she preferred it to something more transparent. There was a dignity in it, in his assumption that she was not owed his schedule, and in her corresponding refusal to need it. What she was given instead were small things. He noticed that she ran out of a particular kind of tea on day 9, and it appeared on the kitchen shelf by evening. He noticed she had finished the Calvino and left 2 more novels by the same author on her nightstand, without mention. One morning she came to the terrace and found a blanket draped over the chair she used, because the glass didn't trap warmth until the sun was higher, and she had mentioned once, in passing, that mornings were cold. None of these things were acknowledged. They were simply done, with the quiet efficiency of someone who paid attention and acted on what they observed. And Mara found them more unsettling than anything declared or named would have been. Declarations were easy to resist. Quiet attention was something else. On the 10th day, she found him in the library. She had not expected it. The room had always been hers by informal allocation, he working elsewhere, and she had become comfortable in it, in the way you become comfortable in spaces you've been given without condition. She came in with her coffee and her book, and stopped when she saw him. He was in the chair by the window, her chair, technically, or the chair she'd been using, with his own book, one knee crossed over the other, reading with the same focused concentration she'd seen through the study door. He was in a dark sweater rather than a suit, and this was somehow alarming. The simple human domesticity of it, the way it rearranged something in her perception of him. He looked up when she came in. "I can find another place," she offered. "No," he returned to his book. "There's room." She sat in the other chair. They read in silence for an hour, and it was one of the strangest and most oddly comfortable hours she had spent in her adult life. The fire was going. This city in November made you understand why people built fireplaces. And the room smelled of old books and the slight note of whatever he wore. Something dark and cedar-adjacent. Something she was trying not to catalogue. At some point, he said, without looking up from his page, "What are you reading?" "Didion," she said. "The one about grief." A pause. Appropriate? Or inappropriate? She looked at him. "I'm not sure grieving a life I still technically have is the right frame." He looked up then. "You're grieving something." She thought about it honestly. "I'm grieving the version of me that existed 10 days ago. She was very busy and somewhat anxious and had a mostly manageable life, and she had no idea any of this was possible." She paused. "I miss her simple problems." "Simple problems are a luxury," he said, not unkindly. "I know. I didn't realize that until I lost them." He was looking at her with that attention again. In the firelight, his eyes were very dark and very still, and she was aware of the specific vulnerability of sitting in a room with someone who paid complete attention. The feeling of being seen without choosing to be. The way it made you simultaneously present and exposed. "What were you like?" he said slowly. "Before." "What was I like?" "Before this. Before 10 days ago. What was your life?" She thought about it. "Small," she said. "Intentionally small. I grew up poor, which means I grew up in permanent crisis, and at some point I decided that the antidote to crisis was smallness. A small apartment I could afford. A small circle of people I could trust. A career that was manageable." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I thought I was building safety. It turns out I was building a perimeter." "And the perimeter kept you safe?" "Until it didn't." He was quiet. "And you?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "What about me?" "What were you like before?" Something in his expression shifted. "Before what?" She held his gaze. "Before you became whatever you are now." The fire made small sounds. Outside, the city was doing its city things, indifferent. He looked at her for a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, lower. "I was my father's son," he said, "which is not the same as being my own man. It took me many years to understand the distinction, and by the time I did, I had already built something that I couldn't simply step back from." "Do you regret it?" "Regret requires an alternate route," he said. "I don't believe in alternate routes. I believe in the path that exists and the choices made on it." She looked at him, at the firelight on the angles of his face, at the book still open in his lap, at the space between them. Not large, not small, precisely managed. "You believe in control," she said. "I believe that control is the only honest response to a world that is inherently uncontrollable." She thought about this. "I used to believe that too," she said. "And now?" She looked at the fire. "Now I think control is a story we tell ourselves. The world doesn't care about our perimeters." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Perhaps." It was the most concession she had heard from him. It sat between them like something newly placed, careful and tentative, and she chose not to press it further. Some things needed room to exist before they could be examined. They read until the fire burned down, and when she said goodnight, he said it back, and she walked to her room with the specific feeling of something that had shifted slightly, like a piece of furniture moved an inch, which changes the whole geometry of a room. On the 12th day, a man came to the penthouse that Mara was not supposed to see. She was on the terrace, wrapped in the blanket Nico had left there, reading in the thin winter sunlight that the glass made possible. She was not hiding. She had no reason to hide. But the terrace was angled such that she had a partial view through the interior glass into the main room, and when she heard the elevator and voices and looked up, she saw Nico and 2 other men standing near the fireplace. One was Leo, which was ordinary. The other was not ordinary. Tall, blonde, with the particular grooming of someone who thought a great deal about their appearance, wearing a suit that was expensive in the aggressive way of someone who needed you to know it cost money. He was smiling, and it was the kind of smile that suggested the expression had been practiced until it stopped feeling like anything. She didn't try to hear them. She returned to her book. But she was aware of the conversation happening in the room beyond the glass, the gestural vocabulary of it. The blonde man expansive and forward. Nico still and managed in the way she recognized now as his neutral state, which was not the same as his comfortable state. There was something in the set of his shoulders, tension contained. After 20 minutes, the blonde man left. Leo followed. Nico came to the terrace. She felt the door slide open behind her and did not turn immediately. Let him come to her field of view on his own terms. "Who was that?" she said. "Someone I do business with." He looked like someone you were doing business with, despite preferring not to. A pause. He moved to the railing of the terrace and looked down at the city below. "His name is Marcus Renner. He's..." A careful pause. "He moves money. For several organizations, including mine." She nodded slowly. "Including the Carusos?" Nico looked at her. "You're observant." "I had a boring childhood," she said. "I learned to read rooms." He turned back to the city. His jaw was tight in a way she hadn't seen before. "Renner doesn't know you're here. He knows this building is mine, which means it's one of the last places anyone would think to look for you. But if he knew, if anyone connected to the Carusos knew, the value of the arrangement disappears." What did he want? Information about a shipment, a border arrangement. He said it flatly, without detail, and she understood this was the line. Not because he was hiding it from her, but because it was not hers to carry. "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything in this building concerns me right now," she said quietly. "I don't have the luxury of compartments." He looked at her. The tension in his jaw hadn't left entirely, but there was something else there now, a kind of concession, the look of someone acknowledging a fair point they'd rather not have acknowledged. "He asked about a woman," Nico said. Mara stilled. "Not by name, not specifically." His voice was very even. "He mentioned that the Carusos are revising their assessment of certain recent events. The car accident." He paused. "They're not entirely convinced." She processed this. The cold glass above her, the blanket around her shoulders, the city 40 stories below. "How long do we have?" "I don't know. Weeks, perhaps. Perhaps less." She thought about Agent Calloway and his 3-week estimate, and the specific feeling of a timeline contracting. "You need to call Calloway." "I have." He moved away from the railing. "The case is progressing. They have financial evidence and they have witnesses to secondary crimes. But your testimony is the direct link. Without it..." He stopped, looked at her. "We'll handle it." "We," she said. He met her gaze. "Yes." She sat with this word, the plainness of it, the specificity, the way he'd said it without emphasis, as though it was simply true. We. She and Nico Valenti, in the same pronoun. "I'm scared," she said, not performing vulnerability, just stating it, the way she had learned to state things with him, directly, without the softening layer she usually put between herself and difficult emotions. "I know," he said. "Scared people are careful," she said, repeating his words back to him. "You told me that." "I did." "Are you scared?" He looked at her for a long moment, the winter light on his face, the city behind him, the particular stillness. "Of certain things," he said. "Yes." She waited for him to say more, but he didn't, and she didn't push. She had learned to feel the shape of what he could offer and not to press beyond it. What she noticed instead was that he stayed. He sat in the second chair and looked out at the city, and they were quiet together in the way that was becoming, against every intention and despite every reasonable objection, familiar. That night she called Calloway from the new phone. "How close?" she asked. "Actually close, not close enough." Calloway was quiet for a moment that said everything. "We're working on it." "That's not an answer." 3 weeks was optimistic, he said. "We need more time." She looked at the ceiling of her room, the city light through the curtains, the warm amber that Chicago at night produced. "How much more?" "As much as we can buy." After she hung up, she lay in the dark and thought about the Carusos revising their assessment of recent events. She thought about the thin man in the corridor of the Meridian, the way his eyes had found her in the shadow of the doorway with that calculating quality. She thought about Nico saying, "we." She thought about the piano in the dark room, and the Chopin nocturne, and the expression on his face in the doorway that first night. That private, unguarded look that he had rebuilt quickly, and which she suspected he had not intended her to see. She was building a picture of him, piece by piece, the way you build a picture of any person who does not offer themselves directly. The book choices, the tea replaced without comment, the dinner by the window, the blanket on the terrace chair, the way he had said, "I find another way to keep you safe," with the flat certainty of a statement rather than a promise. The things she had to be careful about, the things she turned over and over in the dark, was the difference between a man protecting her because he had agreed to, and a man protecting her because she had become, in the architecture of his careful and controlled life, something he could not allow to be damaged. She suspected these were beginning to be the same thing. She told herself to be careful. She was, after all, a woman who had built a life around being careful. But she also thought, lying in the amber-lit dark, careful is what got you into this room. On the 15th night, she couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. Her sleep had been fractured since the Meridian, her nights full of sounds she couldn't place and images she was trying to integrate. The gun, the corridor, Holt's face. But this night was different. This night the wakefulness had an edge to it, a brightness, a quality of being fully present in the dark that made her restless in a way she couldn't read. She got up at 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen and made tea with the kind she liked, which was always there now. And she stood at the kitchen island in her socks and the oversized sweater she slept in, and held the warm mug and looked at the counter. The building was quiet. Leo had rooms somewhere she hadn't located. The penthouse at 2 in the morning had the specific quality of a very large, held breath. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps exactly. More the sense of movement, the subtle shift in air pressure that large spaces convey when someone else enters them. She turned and found Nico in the kitchen doorway. He was not in a suit. He was in dark trousers and a white dress shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, and he had clearly not been sleeping either. There was a quality of long wakefulness in his eyes, that particular brightness that exhaustion produces in people who are still fully functional, but have been for too many consecutive hours. He looked at her with something close to surprise, which was interesting. She had not seen him surprised before. "Tea?" she offered. A pause. "Yes." She made it without ceremony, without filling the silence with words, and he came into the kitchen and sat at the island across from her, and she set the mug in front of him and wrapped both her hands around her own. This was the least formal arrangement she had been in with him, the absence of suits and setting and the managed geography of dinner. And it had the quality of something accidental, something that had happened in the gap between the versions of themselves they maintained by day. "Do you always wake at 2?" she asked. "Often." He looked at the tea without drinking it. "The hours between 2 and 4 are unproductive for sleep." "And productive for what?" "Thinking." He looked up. "Sometimes just existing in the dark." She understood this. "Me too," she said. "Though lately the dark has more in it." "The meridian." "Yes." He was quiet. "Does it help to talk about it?" She considered this honestly. "I don't know. I haven't talked about it." Calloway asked clinical questions. "You've been—" She paused. "What?" "You've been thoughtful about not pressing." He looked at her with an expression that was, she thought, the nearest thing to tender she had seen in him. A quality of care that was not performed and not habitual. Something specific to her, she suspected, though she couldn't have said with certainty. "I don't press," he said carefully, "because you get to decide what you carry and how. Not me." She thought about this, about the specific dignity of being left in possession of your own grief. "My mother was like that," she said. "She never asked about things that were mine to hold." "She sounds—" He stopped. "Tell me about her." "She died 5 years ago," Mara said. There was still a clean ache in this, a specific note rather than a broad grief. "She was from Oaxaca, and she came here when she was 22 and built everything from nothing. And she was the most competent person I have ever known. She could do anything. She was also very quiet. She believed that the interior life was private and should be tended privately." A pause. "She would have hated everything about my current situation." "Why?" "Because she built our whole life on the belief that you control what comes into it, that safety is a matter of discipline and structure." Mara looked at her tea. "She would have been so angry that I answered my phone that night." "And proud," he said quietly, "that you ran." She looked at him. There it was again, that thing he did sometimes, the precise and honest thing that landed differently than she expected. She thought she'd built immunity to it. She was discovering she hadn't. "Are you comfortable?" she asked, shifting the conversation sideways because she needed to. "Am I? With this? Having me here? Having an obligation you didn't choose?" She kept her eyes on him. "You chose to accept it, but you didn't choose the situation." He turned his mug in his hands. "I don't experience obligation the way most people do," he said. "I've been making choices inside constraints my entire life. This is another constraint. I chose it." "That doesn't tell me if you're comfortable." He looked at her, the white shirt, the 2 open buttons, the kitchen light. She was aware of the narrowness of the island between them. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She waited. "I am not," he said slowly, "entirely comfortable." He was choosing his words with the precision she'd come to recognize as the signal of something genuine. "But not for the reasons you might suppose." "What reasons, then?" He looked at her for a long time. The quality of the silence was extraordinary. She felt it like pressure, like a conversation happening in a language she could almost, but not quite, speak. "You ask very clear questions," he said finally, which was not an answer, But the way he said it, the slight note in his voice that was almost wonder, almost grievance, something caught between the two, told her something she filed carefully and did not examine until she was back in her room at 3:30, with the dark between her and the ceiling, and the particular warmth of a conversation still present in her chest. She lay there and thought, "He is not comfortable because I have become something other than what I was supposed to be. A package in transit, a protected asset, a temporary inconvenience." She had become, she was afraid this was true, and she was afraid it was not, a person to him. She did not know what to do with this. She thought about it for an hour, and then she slept, and she didn't dream about the corridor, or the gun, or the thin man's eyes. She dreamed about the white shirt, and the open buttons, and the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and this was its own kind of alarming. On the 17th day, Leo knocked on her library door and told her that Mr. Valenti was going out and that she was not to leave the building in his absence. She nodded. She understood. She had been understanding this rule for 17 days, but when Leo left, she felt the shift in the penthouse, the way the space changed when he was absent, that quality of a room between notes. And she felt something that was precisely and specifically worry. She sat in the library and tried to read. She couldn't. She picked up her phone and almost called Calloway, and then didn't. Because what would she say? "I'm worried about the man who is keeping me confined in his penthouse. Please advise." She put the phone down. She played the piano for a while, the Chopin again, and then some Debussy, and then something she made up, which was a thing she only did when she needed to process something she couldn't name. The music as a diagnostic tool, feeling for what was underneath. What was underneath was this. She had stopped thinking of him as a threat. This was rational, she told herself. He had been, for 17 days, consistently and quietly present. He had done nothing threatening, and many things considered. He had answered her questions with honesty, and had asked her questions with genuine interest, and had shared space with her in a way that was careful about her autonomy, while being, she admitted this carefully, also warm. Not expressed warmth, not performed warmth, but warmth as a fact, the way the sun is warm when it's present, not because it's trying. She had stopped thinking of him as a threat. This was rational. It was also, she knew, not entirely the product of rational assessment. He came back at 6 in the evening, and she heard the elevator, and heard Leo's voice, and then his, low and calm. And she was in the library, and she stayed there, maintaining the ordinary geography of her day, refusing to get up and walk to the door to confirm his presence. She was not waiting. She had simply been reading. The fact that the reading had not been productive for 3 hours was irrelevant. He found her anyway. He stood in the doorway. He always found her in doorways, she was beginning to think. And he was still in his coat, which he had not yet removed, and he was looking at her with something she couldn't read. His face had the particular quality of long negotiation, of a day that had cost something. "Sit down," she said, before she'd decided to say it. He looked at her. "You look like you've been standing all day," she said. "Sit down." He came in and sat, and it was the second chair again, which had become his in the same way the first had become hers. He removed his coat, draped it over the arm without ceremony. He did not speak immediately. She did not prompt him. After several minutes, he said, "The Carusos have increased their activity in the last 48 hours. Activity meaning movement, personnel, a particular kind of consolidation that precedes action. He looked at the fire she'd started an hour ago. They're looking for something. Or someone. Her fingers tightened on the spine of the book she wasn't reading. You went to confirm this? Among other things. Is it safe for you to go to those meetings?
If they know you've taken a federal arrangement.
They don't know that, you said. To everyone in my world, you don't exist, and I am exactly what I have always been. She thought about what it cost to be exactly what you have always been, every day, without the relief of being seen otherwise. She thought about the kitchen at 2 a.m, the undone buttons, the honest and ungoverned expression. That must be exhausting, she said. He looked at her sharply, the look of someone who had not expected to be accurately perceived. Yes, he said after a pause. She nodded, not with sympathy exactly, but with recognition, person to person, the kind that doesn't require words around it. What do we do? She asked. He looked at her steadily. You stay here. You stay close. If I tell you not to leave a room, you don't leave the room. I haven't left the building in 17 days. I know. Something in his voice, a note of something she hadn't heard before. I know that. He stopped. I'm asking more of you than I should. She looked at him. The fire, the books, the rain beginning on the windows. She heard it now, the distinctive sound of November rain on high glass, which was different from rain at street level, thinner and more solitary. You're keeping me alive, she said. That's the minimum requirement, he said, and the dryness in it made her smile. Minimum requirements can also be asked of people, she said. I don't hold them against you. He was quiet, looking at the fire. She watched his profile, the jaw, the straight nose, the precise architecture of a face that had been designed, she thought, to give nothing away, and which was, in this room, giving more than he knew. Tell me something good, she said suddenly. He turned to her. About your life, she said. Not the complications, something good. He looked at her with an expression that was, briefly, disarmed. I don't get asked that, he said. I know. She held his gaze. Tell me anyway. He thought about it. She could see him thinking, could see the specific effort of someone reaching for something real. Milan, in spring, he said, finally. There's a garden near the Navili, very small, mostly used by people who live in the building above it. When I was studying there, I used to read there on Sunday mornings. It was quiet, in a way that felt chosen rather than accidental, like someone had built that quiet deliberately. He paused. I haven't been back in 15 years, but I think about it. She sat with this image. A young man in a small garden, reading, in a quiet he had not yet traded for the specific loudness of the life he'd been born into. We'll go there, she said. After. He looked at her. The after. The word that contained everything undone and everything still possible. After, he agreed, quietly, like a promise he hadn't meant to make. On the 21st day, Nico told her he was taking her out. She stared at him. It's controlled, he said. I own the venue. I control who enters and where people are positioned. You'll be with me at all times. He looked at her steadily. The case is taking longer than projected. Calloway told you. He told me. You've been in this building for 3 weeks. You need to be in the world. It will... He paused. It will be good for you. She thought about this, about the specific cost of 3 weeks in a beautiful cage, about the city she'd been watching from 40 floors up, doing its ordinary business without her. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, as if testing the word's weight. Where? 11. It's a club I own in the West Loop. He looked at her. It's not what I would choose for you. It's what I can control. I'll find a dress, she said. The look on his face when she said this, that ghost smile, something almost warm. She filed it. She had an extensive filing system for the expressions of Nico Valenti. She wore a dress she found in the wardrobe that she suspected had been purchased specifically for this outing. Deep red, structured, the kind of dress that announced something. She put her hair up. She looked in the mirror and thought, this is not you. And also, this is some version of you. And both things are fine. He was waiting in the main room when she came out. He was in a black suit with a black shirt, no tie, and when he turned and saw her, the pause was brief, but it was there. A fraction of a second in which his composure did something that it then corrected. You look, he started. Don't, she said, because something in his voice made her need to interrupt it, made her chest do something unwise. He looked at her steadily. I was going to say capable, he said. Were you? No, he admitted very quietly. She picked up the small clutch that had appeared on the entry table. Let's go, she said. The club was extraordinary, a subterranean space that descended from street level into something vast and dark and beautiful, with a ceiling that was all exposed steel and Edison light, and the music something deep and European, and not quite what she expected. It was a Thursday, and it was full in the way that places are full when people want to be somewhere that feels real. Not a party, but a pulse. He moved through it with the specific gravity of ownership, the way the space organized itself around his presence without anything theatrical, the staff catching his eye and adjusting, people they passed performing a slight recalibration that was not civility, but acknowledgement. He moved with his hand at the small of her back, not gripping, not possessive, guiding, the way you guide someone through unfamiliar terrain. She was aware of it with every step. They had a private table elevated above the floor, with sightlines to every entrance, which she understood immediately was the strategic choice. He sat beside her rather than across, shoulder to shoulder, able to speak close and watch the room, and she understood this too. You come here often? She said, because the question was ridiculous enough to be grounding. I own it, he said. That's not an answer. When I need to be seen, he said. When being visible serves a purpose. She looked at the room below them, the movement, the light, the specific energy of people choosing each other for an evening. Does it ever just serve pleasure? He was quiet for a moment. Less than it used to. A server appeared with drinks. He had ordered, she noted, something specific for her, a cocktail that arrived with a sprig of rosemary, and was exactly what she would have chosen herself had she been asked, which she hadn't been. She looked at it, looked at him. You remembered, she said. You mentioned you liked rosemary in... I know when I mentioned it, she said. She held his gaze. I just meant that you remembered. The expression that moved across his face was complicated and quick. and she watched it happen. The specific vulnerability of being caught in the act of paying attention to someone. "I'm observant," he said. "So am I," she said. The night passed in layers. They drank and talked. The music was the right volume for conversation when leaned close, which she thought was probably designed as much as it seemed accidental. He knew people in the room. One man approached and they spoke briefly in Italian that she didn't entirely follow, though she caught enough to understand it was about something legitimate, a building project, a contract. He introduced her smoothly as a friend from out of town, which was true in the way that very careful things are true. But there was a moment, around midnight, when the night changed. A man appeared at the far end of the elevated area, not at their table, not approaching, but present in a way that registered in Nico's body before she could name why. She felt the shift in him beside her, felt it the way you feel a temperature change, a slight condensing, an increased stillness that was qualitatively different from his ordinary stillness. She looked. The man was dark-haired, broad, with eyes that were moving across the space in a specific, professional way. He was not looking for a place to sit. He was looking for information. His gaze went across the room, across the table, across her, and she felt it like a physical thing. The moment of assessment, the registering of her face. And then it moved on. But he had seen her. She was certain of it. She kept her expression neutral. She did not reach for Nico's hand, though something in her wanted to. She picked up her drink and took a measured sip. Under his breath, barely moving his lips, Nico said, "Don't look at him again." "I'm not looking at him." "Good." "Who is he?" A pause. "Someone who works for the Carusos." The rosemary cocktail tasted like nothing for a moment, all her sensory attention redirected. "Did he recognize me?" "I don't know." His voice was absolutely even. "We're going to stay exactly as we are for 15 more minutes, and then we're going to leave as if we have somewhere better to be." "Do we?" "We have somewhere safer to be," he said, "which is better." She held the performance of ordinary for 15 minutes, laughed at something he said, genuine because he said something actually funny, which surprised her more than the Caruso operative at the end of the room. She turned toward him, leaning slightly, presenting to anyone watching the image of two people who were somewhere by choice and not by strategy. When they left, his hand was at her back again, more firmly this time, and he moved them through the room with a pace that was just barely below hurried, and she matched it, and when they reached the car outside and the door closed behind them, she let out a breath that was longer than she intended. He looked at her in the dark of the car. "You did well," he said. "I was terrified," she said. "Yes," he said. "You did well, anyway." She looked at him, the city lights through the car windows moving across his face. The 15 minutes she'd held steady while someone who might want her dead stood 40 feet away. "Thank you," she said. "For what you did in there." "I didn't do anything." "You sat very close," she said, "and talked to me like I mattered." The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. On the 23rd day, Mara heard a name she hadn't heard before. Salvatore. She heard it through the wall of the library, a conversation in the corridor between Nico and Leo, low, but not quite low enough. She was not eavesdropping, she was reading. The word came to her uninvited, with a particular quality of weight that made her look up from the page. She didn't hear the context, she heard the name and Nico's voice saying something after it in Italian, clipped, the tone of someone who was not pleased with the topic being introduced. Then Leo's voice, brief, confirmatory. Then the sound of Nico's office door closing. She went back to her reading. Or she tried. The name sat in the room with her like a guest who hadn't been introduced. That evening, she asked Leo, in the most casual way she could manufacture, if he knew who Salvatore was. Leo looked at her with his habitually neutral expression and paused for exactly 1 beat too long. "I couldn't say," he said, which told her quite clearly that he could. She waited until she and Nico were in what had become their habitual evening arrangement. The library, the fire, the 2 chairs, books that functioned as props for conversations that had long since exceeded literature. She waited through a chapter and a half of her novel, which she was now actually reading, because the story was extraordinary, and she refused to let paranoia take even this from her. "Salvatore," she said without looking up. Nico, across the fire, turned a page. "Tell me who he is," she said. A pause. "Why?" "Because I heard his name, and your voice did something when you said it, and I've learned that your voice is extremely informative if you pay attention to it." He looked up then. His expression was not alarmed exactly, but with a quality of recalibration. "You've been studying my voice?" "I've been in this building for 23 days. I've been paying attention to everything I have access to. Your voice is one of those things." He held her gaze for a moment, then, "Salvatore Caruso." She put down her book. "The second son," Nico said. He had the tone of someone delivering a briefing they'd prepared. "Vittorio Caruso is the head of the family. Salvatore is—" A pause. "He's the one you saw." She understood immediately. "The thin man?" "Yes." The club corridor, the gun, the eyes that had found her in the shadow. "He was the one who killed Holt," she said. "Yes." "And he's the one who'll be prosecuted if I testify." "Yes." She absorbed this, the shape of it. Salvatore Caruso. The name giving a face, and the face giving a fear that was different in quality from the nameless fear she'd been carrying. Specific fear was, paradoxically, slightly easier to manage than formless threat. It had edges. It could be reasoned with. "Why did you say his name like that?" she asked. Nico was looking at the fire. "Like what?" "With—" She paused, searching for the right word. "With something personal in it." The fire. The rain on the windows, which had been a constant in this city lately, as if November were apologizing for being November. "Salvatore Caruso and I have a history," he said carefully. "We were—" Another pause. "Our families had an arrangement years ago. A business understanding. He violated it." "How?" "In a way that cost people I cared about significantly." He said it evenly, but she heard what was behind the evenness, which was not nothing. "Is that why you agreed to this? The federal arrangement? Because of Salvatore?" He looked at her, directly. "Partly." "And the other part?" A pause that lasted long enough to become an answer. "Other parts," he said. "Multiple." He returned to his book. The relevant point is that Salvatore Caruso is not patient. He is not methodical in the way his brother is. He stopped again. This was a man who stopped more in conversation than he meant to, she had noticed, when the topic was something that mattered. He's erratic, and he's escalating. "The increased activity you mentioned." Yes. Is he coming here? She asked. She kept her voice steady. Nico looked up. His eyes found hers across the fire and held them. And there was something in this look, a directness, a complete absence of the careful management he usually maintained, that was its own kind of answer before the words arrived. "Not while I'm alive," he said. It was said simply, without drama, without posture. As pure statement of fact, the way he had said "we" weeks earlier, with the flat certainty of something already decided. She sat with this for a moment. With the specific quality of being told something that was meant to be reassurance, and was also something else. Something that spoke to a decision more personal than professional, more about her than about the arrangement, more about what she had become in this building than what she was to begin with. She should have said thank you. She should have nodded and gone back to her book. Instead, she said, very quietly, "Be careful." He looked at her. "With yourself," she said. "Be careful with yourself." Something moved through his expression, quick and involuntary, and then gathered in. But she'd seen it. She'd gotten very good at seeing the things that moved through him before he gathered them. "Go to bed," he said, gently enough that it didn't sound like dismissal. She went. She lay in the dark and thought about the way he had said, "Not while I'm alive." Not as threat, not as bravado, but with the simple grammar of a man for whom certain outcomes had already been decided, certain trades already made. She was beginning to understand that she was one of the things he had decided about, and that this decision had been made, she thought, some time ago. Probably around the time of the kitchen at 2 in the morning, or the garden in Milan, or the blanket on the terrace chair, or one of the small, unannounced moments that accumulate in the way that gravity accumulates, invisibly, irresistibly, until you look up and find you are significantly further from where you started than you knew. She pressed her face into the pillow. She was not going to be stupid. She was not going to be naive. She pressed her face into the pillow and thought about his eyes across the fire, and the specific flatness in his voice when he said, "Not while I'm alive." And she thought, "You are already being both." They drove her across the city before the sun fully rose on the 26th day, and Mara watched Chicago slide past the tinted windows of the black SUV, with the feeling of someone watching a life she recognized become gradually unfamiliar a second time. The first time had been the morning after the meridian. This time was different. Not loss, but translation. The city she was moving through was the same city, but she was not the same woman who had left it. She had woken that morning to the sound of Leo's voice in the corridor, too measured to be ordinary conversation, and too urgent to be anything other than a problem. She had dressed quickly with the efficiency she had developed over 25 days of living inside someone else's security protocols, and she had come out of her room to find Nico already in the main space, with his phone to his ear, coat on, the specific posture of someone who has received news and is already in motion. He had looked at her when she emerged. One look. The kind that took inventory and confirmed, and then moved on to the next necessary thing. "Pack what matters," he said. 20 minutes. She did not ask. She understood. She went back to her room and pulled the bag from the wardrobe and put inside it the things she had come to think of as hers. The books, the photograph of Elena she'd found Leo had quietly obtained for her somewhere in week 2, the dark dahlias pressed flat inside the back cover of a novel. She did not examine why she was keeping these, she simply kept them, and the small rosemary plant from the kitchen windowsill, which she wrapped in a kitchen towel and nestled between 2 sweaters. 20 minutes. She was ready in 17. Nico met her in the entry. Leo was behind him, efficient and unreadable, and there were 2 other men she recognized from the building's security rotation. The elevator, the private entrance, the black SUV waiting in the pre-dawn cold. "What happened?" she said once the door was closed and the car was moving. "Someone attempted to access the building's service systems," he said. "The elevators, the security floor." "Caruso's?" "We believe so." She sat with this. Outside, Chicago at 5 in the morning. The skeleton of a city, the bones of it, everything that was essential and none of the flesh of ordinary hours. She had never seen it this stripped before. It was, she thought, beautiful, in a way that required the removal of comfort to perceive. "They're escalating," she said. "Yes." "How did they know?" "They may not know specifically," he said. "They may be investigating this building as one of several locations. We don't know yet." He looked at her. "I need to move you." "I understood that when you said pack." Something in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent. "You never make anything harder than it needs to be," he said. She looked at him. "That's possibly the nicest thing you've said to me." "I've said many nice things to you." "You've said accurate things to me," she said. "Which is better than nice. But you've been sparing with the uncomplicated ones." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the pre-dawn street. "You're right," he said. And then, "You never make anything harder than it needs to be. That's uncomplicated. And it's accurate." She looked out the window, felt the warmth of it, the small, specific warmth of being known without ceremony. "Where are we going?" "Lincoln Park," he said. "A brownstone. Smaller, less known, less associated with me publicly." He paused. "It's a different kind of safe." The brownstone presented to the street with the face of an ordinary, well-maintained building. Red brick, a short flight of steps, window boxes that were empty now, but had the structural suggestion of something that bloomed in other seasons. There was no indication from the outside of the security measures inside or the ownership behind it. She looked at it through the car window and thought, this is a house. The penthouse had been extraordinary. This was a house. She could work with a house. Inside, 3 floors, narrower rooms, ceilings lower than the penthouse, but with the specific warmth that only walls built close together produce. A kitchen with a window that faced a garden, winter bare, structural, all bone and wire. A sitting room with a fireplace that was clearly used, the grate with ash in it from a previous season. Books on the shelves here too, less curated than the penthouse library, more accumulated. The shelves of someone who had been coming to this place across years and leaving things behind. Her room was on the 2nd floor, his was on the 3rd. There was a staircase between them that was not large. She was aware of the staircase. Leo showed her the emergency panel in the closet, the service passage, the side exit, with the same calm efficiency with which he showed her all things. She noted it. She memorized it. She filed it in the category of information she hoped never to need, and suspected she might. On the 2nd day at the brownstone, she found Nico in the kitchen when she came down at 7. He was already there, coffee made, standing at the window that looked onto the bare garden with the particular quality of stillness she had learned to read as thought rather than absence. He was in the dark sweater again. Not the suit, the sweater, which was becoming the signal of unstructured time, of hours that belonged to something other than the professional apparatus of his life. "The garden will be different in spring," he said, without turning. He had heard her come in. "How do you know I was looking at it?" she said. "Because you always look at the thing that's in the most interesting stage," he said. "Everything in that garden is dormant. You'd find that interesting." She went to the coffee. "You've been paying attention." "I told you. I'm observant." "You told me that at the nightclub." She poured. "I told you I was, too." He turned then, finally, and looked at her across the small kitchen. This was the thing about the brownstone, the smallness of it, the nearness. She had been 40 floors above the city, in the penthouse, everything vast and managed at distance. Here, the walls were close, and the ceilings were warm, and there was nowhere to put distance if you tried to manufacture it. "The garden," she said, "will look completely different in 3 months." "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. 3 months. Neither of them said what both of them were calculating. Whether 3 months was a duration they had. "Tell me something about this place," she said. "Something true." He looked around the kitchen. "I bought it 7 years ago," he said. "I told everyone it was an investment property, a rental." He paused. "I've never rented it." "Why?" He looked at the garden. "Because there are places you need to exist that don't belong to anything. Places that aren't part of the architecture." He turned the coffee cup. "This is one of those." She thought about this. About a man who had built an entire life of architecture, systems, organizations, structures, and had still needed one place outside of it. A small garden, a brownstone in Lincoln Park, a room where the shelves held books accumulated over years, left behind on departures, uncurated. "I'm glad you brought me here," she said, "instead of somewhere else." He looked at her directly. "So am I," he said. They stood in the kitchen with their coffees and the bare garden through the window, and the day beginning, and it was, she thought, one of the most intimate mornings she had experienced. Not because anything was declared or acted upon, but because of the specific quality of two people being simply present in a kitchen together, without performance or management, just the coffee and the light and the winter garden and whatever they were becoming. The brownstone settled into her bones in ways the penthouse hadn't. This was not a criticism of the penthouse, which had been extraordinary. She had spent 6 weeks in a space that most people would have called paradise, despite the circumstances, and she knew this. But the penthouse had been someone else's extraordinary. Its beauty was in its scale, its positioning above the city, its art and its dark leather, and its floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the skyline into theatre. It had been designed to impress, to contain, to project a certain quality of power. Even its warmth, the blanket on the terrace, the books on the nightstand, had arrived as interventions in a space that was primarily about its own magnificence. The brownstone was different in its bones. Its rooms were the right size for people. Its kitchen was designed for cooking, not display. The sitting room fireplace had been lit by someone across many winters, and you could feel that. The specific warmth of repeated occupation, of a space that had been habituated and returned to and inhabited across time. She cooked in it. This surprised her the first evening. She found herself opening the refrigerator, which Leo had stocked with actual ingredients rather than prepared things, and thinking, I could make something. She made arroz con leche, which she had not made since before her mother died, and which required a particular kind of sustained attention that she found, standing at the stove with the milk and the cinnamon, to be exactly what her brain needed. Something that required her hands and her focus and gave back warmth. Nico appeared in the kitchen doorway while she was stirring. He looked at the pot, then at her. What is that? Arroz con leche, she said. Do you know it? Rice pudding, he said. I know rice pudding. It's not rice pudding, she said, with a precision that made him pause. Rice pudding is what they make with leftover rice and call dessert. This is what my mother made on Sunday evenings, when we needed something that tasted like everything would be fine. He was quiet for a moment. May I watch? She looked at him. He was in the sweater again, standing in the doorway of a kitchen in a house that was privately his, watching her cook on a stove in a pot that was also his, with an expression that was, she catalogued it carefully, quietly amazed. As if the simple domestic fact of her standing at his stove had reconfigured something in his perception of the space. Yes, she said. You may watch. You could also set the table. He set the table. They ate in the brownstone's small dining room, with 2 candles she'd found in a drawer and the arroz con leche between them in a bowl. And he ate 2 portions without comment, except to ask, at the end, if she would make it again. Yes, she said. When things need to taste like everything will be fine. He looked at her across the table. That's a reasonable frequency, he said. She smiled. He looked at the smile with the expression she had come to think of as the filing expression, the one where he was adding something to whatever internal record he kept of her. She had started to find this less unsettling and more something else, something she was careful about naming. The days at the brownstone had their own rhythm. She ran in the small gym she found in the basement, better equipped than it looked from the outside, which she was coming to understand was a theme of Nico's properties. She read. She played the upright piano he'd had brought in on the second day, which arrived with a tuner who said nothing to her and everything to the instrument, and which had a voice she found herself preferring to the grand in the penthouse. Warmer, slightly imperfect, with the quality of something that had been played rather than merely displayed. She played in the evenings after dinner, and Nico appeared in the doorway with a regularity that suggested it was a thing he had decided to do. He never interrupted. He stood and listened with the specific quality of attention he brought to everything, which was complete, and which she had decided to stop finding destabilizing and simply accept as the way he was made. One evening, midway through a piece she was working out, something between Satie and something she was inventing, which wasn't quite either, he said from the doorway, "That's not anything I recognize." "It's not finished," she said without stopping. "It's something I'm finding." "Finding," he repeated. "Music I don't know yet," she said. "I find it by playing toward it." He was quiet. She played. The brownstone was quiet around them, the city outside reduced to distant sound, the kind of sound that reminds you the world exists without requiring you to engage with it. After a while, she came to a natural stopping point and let her hands rest on the keys. "Play it again," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know it well enough yet. I'd play it differently this time." "Then play it differently," he said. She looked at the keys, then at him. "Sit," she said. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the bench, not at the keys, just beside her. close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him in the room's evening cool. She played it again, differently, and it was not the same piece, but it was the same search, and he sat beside her and listened, with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance of someone who is hearing something and deciding what it means to them. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "What are you finding?" he asked, in a voice that was lower than usual. She looked at the keys. "Something that sounds like right now," she said. He was quiet. "The specific feeling of right now," she said, "which is strange and frightening, and also," she paused, "also something I don't have the other word for yet." She felt him look at her. She kept her eyes on the keys. "I think I know the word," he said. She looked at him then, his profile at the edge of her field of vision, then the turn, then the direct gaze. Amber dark, very still, very present. "Tell me," she said softly. He held her gaze for a long moment, something crossing his face, the movement of the thing he felt behind the architecture, the thing she had been watching find its way to the surface across 30 days. "Not yet," he said. Quiet, particular. The not yet of someone who has decided on the timing of something they intend to do. She nodded. She looked back at the keys. She played something small and resolved, a closing phrase, the musical equivalent of a door left ajar. "After," she said. "After," he agreed. And it was a different after than the garden in Milan. The garden was a plan. This was a promise. On the 31st day, everything happened at once. Calloway called at 7 in the morning, early, the call of someone who had been awake for hours already. Mara answered in the kitchen, with her coffee still in her hand, and she heard in his voice, before he said anything, the specific quality of news that is not good and not devastating, but sits precisely in between. "We have a problem," he said. "Tell me." The financial evidence we had, the chain of documentation linking the Caruso family's funds to Holt. 3 of the key documents have been suppressed. Someone in the courthouse. A clerk with access to the filing system. A pause. The case didn't collapse, but it thinned. She absorbed this. "How thin?" "Your testimony is no longer corroborating evidence," he said. "It's primary. You're the case, Miss Vasquez." She set her coffee down very carefully. "How long until the trial?" 6 weeks, if we can hold the timeline. 6 weeks. She had been here for 31 days, and 6 more weeks stretched out like something geological. She did the arithmetic without wanting to. 6 weeks was 42 days, and 42 days added to 31 gave her a number that was, she thought, long enough that either everything would clarify or everything would collapse. "And the Carusos?" she asked. "Are aware the case thinned," he said. "Our source says Salvatore has been activated." Activated? He's taking a personal role in resolving the situation. The thin man, the corridor, the eyes that had found her in the doorway. "Understood," she said. She kept her voice very even. "Thank you for telling me." She went to find Nico. He was in his study on the top floor. She went to the door and knocked, and he said, "Come in," and she came in and stood in front of his desk, and she told him. She told him everything Calloway had said, concisely, without editorializing, and she watched his face as she spoke, the particular way it processed difficult information, that analytical stillness, the slight tightening that was not visible to anyone who hadn't spent 31 days learning to read him. When she finished, the room was quiet.
6 weeks, he said.
Yes. He stood, moved to the window. This building faced a street of brownstones and bare trees, and he stood looking at it with his hands in his pockets. And she stood across the room and watched him think. She had learned to let him think, to give him the space of it, to not fill his silences with her own anxiety. This was one of the things she had learned in 31 days that she would carry afterward. That some silences are work, and interrupting them is not kindness. "You should know," she said when he had been quiet long enough, "that I'm not going to break." He turned. "I know this is complicated," she said. "I know the case thinned, and I know Salvatore is escalating, and I know that 6 weeks is a long time. I'm telling you, I'm not going to break. I will testify. I saw what I saw, and I am going to say what I saw in a courtroom. And I am not going to be persuaded or frightened out of it." She paused. "I need you to know that, so you can plan accordingly." He was looking at her with an expression that was doing multiple things simultaneously. Something that looked like respect, something that looked like relief, something that looked like what she could now, after 31 days, identify as the thing he felt for her that he had not yet named. "I know," he said. "I never doubted it." "Good," she said. "Mara." He said her name. The first time she had heard it from him without the formality, without the professional distance. It landed differently. It landed like something chosen. "I need to tell you something." She waited. He came closer. Not all the way across the room, halfway, the precise midpoint, which was its own kind of statement. "The reason I accepted this arrangement," he said. "I told you it was Salvatore. That's true, but it's not." The stopping again. "When Calloway came to me, he showed me your file. Background, the event coordinator, the gluten allergy at table 7. Something moved across his face. "The reason you were there." She looked at him. "I've made many choices in my life that I would call necessary," he said. "They've cost things. I know that. I've been building, for years, an argument that the way I operate is contained, that I protect what's mine and don't reach beyond it." He was speaking with the difficulty of someone who very rarely speaks this kind of truth. "And then I read about a woman who went back to find a catering manager about a dietary restriction and saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and I thought—" He stopped. "What?" she said softly. "I thought, not her," he said. "Not her specifically. She shouldn't carry this." She stood in the middle of the room with this. "And then you walked into my penthouse without shoes," he said, and something in his voice was not quite broken, but approaching the vicinity of it. "And you looked at me like you were afraid, and like you were also not going to let the fear make any decisions for you. And I thought—" Another stop. "I have been thinking many things since then, that I'm having considerable difficulty managing." The room was very quiet. "Nico," she said. "Don't," he said. "Not yet." He exhaled. "I need to keep you safe for 6 more weeks. I need to keep my head clear enough to do that. If you say whatever you're about to say, I'm not—" I was going to say thank you, she said. He looked at her. For telling me, she said. Thank you for telling me that. He looked at her for a long moment. In the study, with the window and the bare trees, and the 31st day of a confinement that had become something else entirely. Go, he said. I need to make some calls. She went. She closed the door. She stood in the corridor outside his study with her back against the wall and her eyes on the ceiling. And she thought about not her specifically, and about the absence of shoes in a penthouse that was not hers, and about the extraordinary plain truth of what he had just told her. She thought, this is the most dangerous thing you've done. She thought, it started happening long before today. The message came on the 34th day. It came through a channel that should not have existed. A contact of Nico's, a man named Drago, who operated in the grey spaces between organised loyalties, whose value was precisely that he belonged to no one. He called Nico at noon, and Nico took the call in his study, and afterward he came downstairs with the phone still in his hand and sat at the kitchen table. Mara was there. She saw his face and did not ask immediately. She had learned this, that there were moments when questions were interruptions, and that the right response to someone carrying news was to give them a moment to decide how to carry it toward you. She put the kettle on. She sat across from him. She waited. Drago, he said, finally. Yes? She said. Salvatore knows you're alive. The word knows with its specific weight. Not suspects, not is investigating. Knows. How? The club, he said. Someone placed a photograph. A pause. The man you saw that night at the nightclub. He wasn't there by coincidence. Her mind went back to the elevated table, the music, the man at the far end of the space with his professional eyes moving across the room. The moment of assessment. She had felt it. She had said so in the car afterward. She had known. He confirmed it, she said. It wasn't a question. He confirmed it enough. Nico's jaw was very tight. Salvatore sent a message through Drago. He offered an arrangement. What arrangement? One in which you disappear quietly, and in exchange, certain things I value professionally are preserved. She looked at him steadily. What did you say? He met her eyes. I told Drago to relay a counter-offer. Which was? That Salvatore should concern himself with his coming legal situation, and leave my affairs to me. My affairs, she repeated. He held her gaze. Yes. She understood what this meant. He had declined. Openly. He had told Salvatore Caruso, through a back channel, that she was not negotiable. This was not a small thing. This was, in the architecture of the world he operated in, a declaration. A declaration of priority. A declaration of allegiance. Not professional, not strategic, but the kind that had a person's name attached to it. That's going to make things worse, she said. Yes, he agreed. Short term. And long term? Long term, you testify. The case concludes, and the Carusos have a legal problem large enough to occupy them entirely. If the case doesn't collapse further, it won't. He said it with a certainty she hadn't heard before. An operational certainty, the voice of someone who had done something rather than someone who was hoping. I've arranged for additional documentation, a different source, not through the courthouse. It's clean. She looked at him. When did you... Yesterday. She processed this. The specific timeline. Calloway's call at 7, her conversation with Nico in the study, and then, while she was reading and playing the piano and managing the specific weight of her day, he had been moving pieces into position on a board she couldn't see. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't want to." "You didn't tell me," she said again, more quietly. "I know you're trying to protect me. I know there are things in your world I shouldn't carry. But this is my life, Nico. This is the thing that cost me my life as I knew it and put me here, and I need to be—" She stopped. "I need to be included." He looked at her, the particular quality of someone who has understood a fair point and is sitting with the discomfort of having missed it. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was reassessing, with honesty about what he was seeing, rather than defensiveness about what he'd done. "You're right," he said. "I know. A pause. "I'm accustomed to managing things alone." "I know that too," she said. "But you said 'we' at the beginning. Remember? Week 1 in the penthouse. You said 'we' and I noticed it." "I remember," he said. "Then act like it," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, something moving through his expression that she watched happen. That opening that he did occasionally. The moment when the composure had something behind it that came through. "The documentation goes to the federal prosecutor today," he said. "It includes recorded conversations from 6 months ago. Salvatore explicitly, in his own voice, discussing the Holt situation in advance. It corroborates your testimony before you've given it." She sat with this. That's significant." "It may be determinative." "Where did you get it?" "I've been building it for 8 months," he said. "Since before this arrangement. Before Calloway came to me." He looked at the window. "I told you Salvatore cost me something. I don't leave things unresolved." She understood, fully, something she had been understanding in parts. This arrangement, her protection, the penthouse, the brownstone, the extraordinary care and the books and the tea and the blanket, had not been the favour Calloway had described. It had not been a debt called in. It had been the last piece of something Nico Valenti had been building for years. She was not just being protected. She was the final move in a game that predated her. She should have been angry about this. She examined the feeling carefully and found that it was more complicated, something that contained anger, but also its own kind of resolution, the particular sensation of having misunderstood something important and then understanding it. Being used and being protected had been, in his world, the same thing. But they were no longer. She could see the precise point at which they had diverged. She thought it was around day 5, the piano in the dark room, and she found, examining it honestly, that she believed the divergence was genuine. "Tell me things," she said. "Going forward. Tell me things." "Yes," he said. "Even if you think they'll frighten me?" "Yes." "I'm not made of glass," she said. "I know." And then, very quietly, almost to himself, "I know exactly what you're made of." There was a phone call on the 37th day that she was not supposed to know about, and which changed something. She had been in the sitting room reading when she heard his voice from the floor above. Not words, just tone. And the tone was wrong. Not the careful, professional register, or the lower, more private register she associated with their evenings together. Something else. something that had an edge she had not heard before, and a quality that was more intimate than either of the professional modes, and which made her look up from her page before she had decided to. She heard it and thought nothing of it initially. His world was full of conversations that had edges. She had learned not to track the emotional register of every sound from the top floor. But then she heard a name. Adriana. She heard it because it was said differently than other names. It had a quality, a slight change in the timbre, something between past tense and present, something that was not professional and was not neutral, something that had history in it. She heard it once, clearly, and then the voice dropped again, and she heard nothing further. She returned to her book. She read the same paragraph 3 times without any of it becoming language. At dinner that evening, they ate together now without any formality of invitation, simply sat down at the small table in the brownstone kitchen when the hour was right. She asked him, very casually, how his day had been. "Manageable," he said, which was his standard answer. She looked at her plate. Adriana called. A pause. She felt it rather than saw it, the slight change in pressure, the fractional reorganization of his attention. "Yes," he said. "Old business?" she said, still casual, still looking at her plate. "Old, yes." A careful pause. "We were involved some years ago. She's moved in different circles since. She called because she heard certain rumors about my current situation. She was concerned." "Concerned?" Mara said. "Worried is perhaps closer." "About you, specifically?" "About me, specifically," he confirmed. She ate. The food was, as always, good. They had developed a system. She cooked some evenings and he cooked others, which she had not anticipated, and which was one of the stranger and more intimate facts of the current arrangement. She had made the arroz con leche already. He had made something with roasted lamb last week that she still thought about. "Is she," Mara said carefully, "someone I need to know about?" The pause, this time, was longer than any of the others. "No," he said. "Nico." "She is someone from a different chapter," he said. "She's not. There's nothing current." "She called you." "People call me," he said. "Many people call me. Most of them." "She called you and your voice did something," Mara said, still even, still looking at the plate. "I heard it from downstairs. I'm telling you this because I would rather tell you than not tell you." The table, the kitchen, the bare garden through the window, catching the last of the winter light. "What did my voice do?" he asked, not defensively, genuinely, with the specific quality of someone who wanted an accurate report. She looked up. "Something I recognized," she said. "Something like mine does when I think about certain things." He looked at her across the table. "You recognized history," she said. "History and something left over from it." He was very still. "Mara, I'm not asking you to account for anything," she said. She kept her voice steady with an effort she hoped didn't show. "I'm just telling you that I heard it, and that I—" She stopped. She started again. "I'm aware that I have no standing to feel the thing I feel about it." "What do you feel?" he asked. Quietly, precisely, with the manner of someone who wanted the exact truth. and not a managed version of it. She looked at him, the kitchen light, the table between them. "Jealous," she said. The word sat there, naked and accurate and unapologetic. The silence that followed had a quality she'd never heard before, something that the word electric approximated but didn't capture, something that had weight and direction and specificity, a silence that was moving rather than static.
"You feel jealous," he said.
"Yes."
"Because of a phone call?"
"Because of how your voice sounded during a phone call," she said. "Which is worse, actually." He looked at her for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table, and she watched them. Those careful, composed hands that managed everything with the same precision he brought to every aspect of his existence. And she watched something in his expression move past all the architecture, past the management, past the careful structure of a man who had spent his adult life deciding what to let in and what to hold at distance. "She and I," he said carefully, "ended 4 years ago. Not because of indifference, because of the life I live, which does not allow for certain things without putting them at risk." He looked at the table. "I made a choice. She deserved someone who could give her a different kind of life. And now?" "Now she called because she heard, from mutual contacts, that I had a woman in my building." He paused. "She called to assess." "Assess whether she'd made a mistake," Mara said. "Perhaps." "And what did you tell her?" He looked at her directly. "I told her she hadn't made a mistake, that the reasons were the same, that I was—" He stopped. "I told her I was occupied." "Occupied," she repeated. "Entirely," he said. The word landed. She sat with it. Entirely occupied. With her. By her. He had told his past, with the quiet finality of a man who had decided where the present was going, that she was where he was. That she was the fact of his current life, not the arrangement, not the federal obligation, but the woman at the table, and the arroz con leche, and the evenings by the fire, and all of it. Her. She should have said something measured, something that acknowledged what he'd offered without pressing further than the moment allowed. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He looked at it, then at her. Something moved through his face that was not managed and not composed, and was, she thought, the realest thing she had seen in him yet. Something that had been waiting behind 37 days of careful architecture. He turned his hand and held hers. They sat like that, the table between them, the bare garden, the dinner going cold, and did not speak, and did not need to. They sat until the light through the kitchen window changed from evening to dark, and then a little longer, and the city went on outside, and they remained perfectly still in a kitchen in Lincoln Park, holding hands across a table, like two people who had found something they had not been looking for, and were not yet sure how to carry it, only sure that they would. 5 weeks in, 1 week until the trial. The days had taken on a different quality, a compression, a specificity, the way time behaves when an ending is visible on the horizon. She was aware of each morning differently now, each evening, the way you are aware of the last days of something you have come to love. The small rituals had become charged with the particular electricity of impermanence. The coffee on the sitting room couch, him across from her with the newspaper he still read in paper form, which she found so characteristic she had stopped remarking on it and started simply appreciating it as the specific, unaltered fact of who he was. The kitchen in the evenings, the piano after dinner, his hand and hers. This had happened again and again, and then become the thing they did without discussion. The wordless agreement of two people who have decided to stop pretending a thing isn't happening. She had stopped calling it confinement. She had stopped calling it anything. It simply was, and she was in it, and she knew it was ending, and the knowledge of its ending made each day heavier and more luminous simultaneously. On the night 6 days before the trial, she couldn't settle. She moved through the brownstones' rooms, feeling the restlessness that she recognized as her mind's refusal to pretend that things were simple. The trial ahead, the testimony she would give. And beyond that, larger and less defined, the shape of afterward. What came after the corridor and the gun and the 6 weeks of being kept alive by a man who had become the most known quantity in her life? She went to the piano. She played for an hour, and it was the most honest hour of music she had made in years. Not technically complex, not particularly disciplined, just honest. Whatever was in her translated into sound and offered to the empty room. Grief for the old life and its small, comfortable problems. Fear for the week ahead. Something that was not grief and was not fear and was, she admitted, sitting at the piano in the dark of the brownstone with the winter night pressing at the windows. Something she had not let herself name, because naming it had felt, until recently, like a luxury she couldn't afford. She heard the stairs. She turned. Nico stood in the doorway. He was in a dark t-shirt and sweatpants, casual, domestic, the late-night version of him that the brownstone had produced in ways the penthouse never had. His feet were bare on the wooden floor, and he was looking at her with the expression that had no architecture on it. The face he showed her increasingly now. The face that was simply his. "What is it?" he said, not asking about the music, asking about her. She turned on the piano bench to face him fully. 6 days, she said. Yes. And then it's over? Yes. And then I go back? He was very still. To your apartment? To my life? She looked at him. Such as it is, after all this. It won't be the same. I'll testify and the Carusos will, and I'll be safer, eventually. Calloway says new identity isn't necessary if the case goes the way it should. I'll just be me again. She paused. A version of me. He came into the room, sat beside her on the bench, close, his arm against her arm, and she was aware of the warmth of him and of the specific intimacy of this piece of furniture, the piano bench that required nearness. He looked at the keys rather than at her. What do you want? He asked. From the trial? From after, he said. She looked at the keys too, the old keys of the old upright piano in the brownstone's small room. I want things that seem complicated, she said. Tell me. I want to go back to work eventually. I want to see my sister. I want to sleep without seeing the corridor. She paused. I want to go to the garden in Milan in spring. He was quiet. I want... She stopped. I want to know what this is, and what it becomes, and whether it can exist outside of... She gestured at the room, the brownstone, the specific world of their confinement. This, whether it only works because of the circumstances. It doesn't only work because of the circumstances, he said. His voice was quiet and very direct. How do you know? Because He stopped. The stopping again. But this one felt different. This one felt like stopping at the edge of something, rather than retreating from it. He looked at her, and his eyes were very close, and she could see in them the full complexity of a man who had spent his entire life managing the distance between himself and everything that mattered, looking at the distance and deciding to close it. Because before you came here, he said, I had not played a game of chess in 3 years. I had not listened to music someone else chose. I had not laughed at dinner in I don't know how long. A pause. I had not told anyone about the garden in Milan. She looked at him. You are not a product of the circumstances, he said. The circumstances produced the opportunity. You. He touched her face. One hand, his thumb at her cheek, the gesture so careful and so deliberate that she felt it in every part of herself. The specific weight of a touch from a man who does not touch carelessly. You are entirely and specifically you. And what I feel... Say it, she said softly. What I feel, he said, is entirely and specifically about you. She looked at him, his hand on her face, the piano behind them both, the brownstone around them, the city outside, the world in which he was what he was and she was what she had become. And none of it was simple, and all of it was, she thought, real, in the way that only things are real when they have been earned. Then we figure it out, she said. After. After, he agreed. And this time, after was not tentative. It was a plan. It was the word spoken by two people who had looked at all the difficulty and decided that the difficulty did not constitute a reason to retreat. She leaned forward slightly, and he was very still, holding himself with extraordinary care, the way a man holds himself when he is preventing himself from doing the thing he most wants to do, because the wanting of it matters more to him than the immediate satisfaction. Not yet, he said, still again. I know, she said. She pressed her forehead to his. Just that. The warmth of it, the specific intimacy of foreheads touching, which is different from everything else. More vulnerable, more domestic, more quietly devastating than any more dramatic gesture could be. After. They sat at the piano until 2 a.m, his hand in her hair, her shoulder against his, the city going quiet outside. Not kissing. Holding the line, not because neither of them wanted to cross it, but because he had decided that he would not allow himself to cross it until she was free. Until the thing that threatened her was resolved. Until she could say yes to him from a position of safety rather than a position of need. This was, she thought, sitting in the small room with her forehead against his and his hand in her hair, the most profoundly romantic thing she had ever experienced. Not the grand gesture, not the declaration. The patience of a man who wants something enough to wait for it to be right. 3 nights before the trial, Salvatore Caruso made his move. It was 2 a.m, which was, she was beginning to think, the hour at which the real things happened. The kitchen conversations, the piano in the dark, the world showing its actual face rather than the face it wore in daylight.
She was asleep, genuinely, deeply, the sleep of someone who had finally learned to rest again in this house, and in the knowledge of who was one floor above. When she heard the noise. Not loud, not breaking glass or shouted commands. A noise that was wrong in a precise, quiet way. The particular sound of a door that has been opened by someone who knows how to open doors silently, and has done it almost correctly. Almost. She was awake before she was conscious of being awake. She lay perfectly still, listening, her heart doing what hearts do in these moments. A rapid, useful terror, the body's intelligence faster than the mind's. She heard nothing further from the direction of the door. She heard from the floor above the sound of movement that was not ordinary, not the casual movement of a man going to the kitchen for water, but the specific, deliberate movement of a man who has heard something and is already in motion. Nico. She reached for the phone. Not Calloway, not 911. Nico's number. And typed a single word, because they had established this weeks ago as the signal. An arrangement so quiet and specific that she had hoped she would never need it, and had memorized it the moment he explained it. Now. Then she did exactly what he had told her to do if this happened. She went to the closet. Not hiding. She was not hiding. She was following a plan. The closet connected to a panel in the back wall, and the panel opened into a service passage that ran the length of the second floor and connected to a side exit. She had been shown this on their first day in the brownstone, with the specific calm of someone who shows you an emergency exit, not to frighten you, but to ensure you never need to be frightened. She was in the passage, in the dark, in her socks and her nightshirt, with her phone in her hand and her breathing controlled by an act of will, when she heard the sounds above her become something else. Voices, brief, low, the exchange of two people in a space not meant for conversation. A crash. Controlled, brief, the sound of a contest rather than chaos. Then Nico's voice, low and cold, and entirely unlike any version of it she had heard before. The voice of someone who has set aside everything he manages in ordinary life, and has become something older and more elemental. Something that was there beneath the architecture, always, and which she understood now had always been there. She waited in the passage. She had been told to wait. She waited for 45 seconds. She counted them. She made it to 43, and then she pushed the panel open and went back through the closet and into the hallway and up the stairs, because 43 seconds was all she had. The top floor landing. Nico standing in the doorway of his room with his shirt torn at the shoulder and blood on his jaw. Not a lot, a cut, but blood. His blood. And at his feet, a man she did not recognize, face down, utterly still, in the particular posture of someone who would not be getting up for some time. Leo was beside Nico, already on his phone, already handling whatever came next with his characteristic efficiency. She stood at the top of the stairs and looked at Nico, and he looked at her, and neither of them spoke for a moment that was very long and very loud in its silence. "I told you to stay in the passage," he said. His voice was even. Beneath the evenness was something enormous. "I know," she said. "Mara, are you hurt?" He touched his jaw, the automatic gesture of someone checking damage rather than acknowledging pain. "No,"
You're bleeding. Minimally. He crossed to her. 2 steps, the landing was small, and he took her face in his hands, with the blood still on his fingers, and he looked at her with the most direct, unguarded expression she had seen on him, ever, in 5 weeks of learning his expressions. The architecture was entirely gone. There was nothing left but him, what he felt, what he had just prevented, what the last 2 minutes had cost him in terms of certainty about how much she mattered. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "I'm fine. You should have stayed in the passage," he said. His hands on her face, the blood, the torn shirt, the man on the floor behind him, Leo's voice in the background. "If something had happened to you while I was—" "I know," she said. "I know. I'm sorry. I couldn't—" She stopped. "I heard, and I couldn't." He looked at her, at the specific fact of her, standing here, present, unhurt, and she could see in his face the precise weight of what couldn't meant to him. She had not been able to stay in the passage because he was upstairs, and she did not know if he was safe. And this fact was now in the open air between them, unmistakable and unmanaged. "I'm here," she said. "We're both here." He pressed his forehead to hers, the same gesture as the piano, the same deliberate warmth, but carrying entirely different weight. The weight of after, the weight of having been frightened and finding the fear was unnecessary. His hands were shaking slightly. She felt it, the very slight tremor of a man coming down from something, the body releasing what it had held in order to function. "Leo," Nico said, without moving. "Already handled," Leo said. "I need 10 minutes. "Take 15, Leo said, and disappeared down the stairs with the quiet efficiency that was his specific genius. They sat at the top of the stairs together, Nico with his back against the wall and her beside him, their shoulders touching, and she put her head against his shoulder and he rested his cheek on her hair, and they were quiet. Below them, Leo moved through the brownstone. Outside, sirens at a distance, the city's ordinary sounds, entirely unrelated to anything that had just happened here. "It was one of Salvatore's," he said into her hair. "Lower level. A scout." "He sent a scout," she said. "He's confirming the location. This was reconnaissance, not an attempt." A pause. "Which means the attempt is still coming." "Before the trial?" "Yes." His voice was very even now, the analytical register reasserting itself over the aftermath of adrenaline. "We need to move again." She lifted her head and looked at him. The cut on his jaw, the torn shirt, the dark eyes in the dark hallway of a house that had become, in 26 days, something that felt like hers. "Miko," she said. "I know," he said. "I know." "I don't think I can—" She stopped. "I don't think we can keep doing this. The not yet. After the trial, yes, I understand why, I respect why. But right now, tonight, I need you to know that I—" "I know," he said. "Mara." He turned, cupped her face again. "I know." "Then say it." "Ti amo," he said. Quiet. Simple. In Italian, which was where things lived most honestly for him. The language of his childhood, his mother, the garden in Milan, all the things that were truest. "Ti amo. I have been—" He stopped and started in English, I have been in love with you since roughly the third day, which is entirely inconvenient and somewhat alarming, and also completely true. She looked at him, at the cut on his jaw and the blood that was drying and the torn shirt and the dark eyes and the absolute plainness of what he had just said.
"Not yet," she said softly.
"I know." She kissed him. Finally. After 6 weeks of not yet, and the garden in Milan, and the piano, and the forehead in the dark, and the hand held across tables, and his voice saying, "Ti amo," in a hallway at 2 in the morning. It was brief. It was intentional. It was something beginning, rather than something complete. The first sentence of a conversation that would take years to finish. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with an expression she had no word for. Not because it was complex, but because it was simple in a way that his expressions rarely were. Uncomplicated. Open. His. "After," he said. "Yes," she said. "After." They moved to a hotel. Not Nico's. A hotel downtown that had no connection to him. Booked under a name that was Calloway's arrangement, with federal agents in the 2 adjacent rooms. It was not the brownstone's domestic warmth or the penthouse's extraordinary views. It was a room with good sheets and a window that faced another building. And it was, Calloway said, the most secure location available for the days remaining. Mara stood in the center of it and felt the specific exhaustion of the last 24 hours. The man on the floor of the brownstone, the stairs, the kiss in the dark hallway, the rapid departure at 4 in the morning, the drive through streets that were still dark and still wet with the night's rain. She had carried the rosemary plant in her lap the whole way. It was sitting on the hotel windowsill now, beside a view of nothing in particular, and its presence made the room feel slightly less like a room and slightly more like somewhere. Nico was in the adjacent room. This had been Calloway's arrangement, appropriate, sensible, the right call, and she understood it, and she lay in her hotel bed on the first night and thought about the wall between them and the kiss and the 3 days until the trial and the word after, and she thought, this is the last stretch. Hold on. She held on. She spent the first day of the hotel in a kind of suspended state. She read. She called Elena, the first real conversation in weeks, long and careful, and constrained by the protocol of the secure line, but her sister's voice reaching her like something she hadn't known she was starving for. Elena asked careful questions. Mara answered the ones she could. "Are you okay?" Elena asked, which was the only question. "Getting there," Mara said, which was the only honest answer. She did not tell Elena about Nico. This felt too large to put in a secure phone call 3 days before a trial. It needed space and time and her sister's full attention, and possibly wine. And it would have all of those things afterward. Nico knocked on her door at 7. She opened it, and he was in the clothes he'd travelled in. A dark jacket, no tie, the least formal version of himself she'd seen in public, and he had a coffee in each hand. "May I?" he said. "Yes," she said. He came in. They sat on the edge of the bed, which was the only furniture suitable for sitting side by side, and there was something quietly extraordinary about this. 2 people in a hotel room in a city that had been, for either of them, a place of extremity. Sitting on the edge of a bed with coffees, and the weight of the coming trial between them, and also everything else. The kiss, the ti amo, the after that was almost within reach. I spoke with the federal prosecutor this morning, he said. Your testimony slot is confirmed. Day 2 of the trial. They'll take you in through a secure entrance. Will the courtroom be controlled as much as it can be? He looked at her. The documentation I provided has been entered into evidence. The prosecutor says it's significant. Your testimony is confirmation, not the foundation alone. That's better, she said. Yes. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. And Salvatore? He'll be in that courtroom, Nico said. In custody, after last night. He paused. The attempt on the brownstone. Leo's contact made a report. Salvatore Caruso was arrested this morning on charges of criminal conspiracy and attempted breaking and entering, among other things. His jaw tightened in the familiar way.
He'll be in the courtroom, but he won't be free.
She thought about this, about sitting in a courtroom and looking across the room at the thin man from the Meridian corridor, about being required to look at him and say what she had seen, clearly and directly, in the voice of someone who had spent 6 weeks becoming, she thought this was true, someone larger than the woman who had been standing in a doorway with a broken heel and a question about a gluten allergy. I can do it, she said, primarily to herself, but she said it aloud because it needed to be in the air between them. I know, he said, not as reassurance, as fact, the fact of her, which he had spent 6 weeks learning. They were quiet, the hotel room, the coffees, 3 days. What happens to you? She asked. After, when the Carusos are, when this is done. He considered. My arrangement with Calloway's office is concluded. They get what they wanted. I return to my life as it was. He paused. With modifications. What modifications? He looked at her, very directly. The dark eyes, the cut on his jaw still healing, the jacket instead of the suit. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about what I told you in the study, about my father and the architecture and the things I decided were not possible. He paused. I've been revisiting those decisions. The decision to love no one, she said, as she had said before. He looked at her. That's still very plainly put. I speak plainly. I know. Something in his voice, something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one, warm at its edges. I know you do. It's one of the things... He stopped. It's one of the things that is specifically you. She thought about the decision and the revision of it, about a man who had closed a door to protect others from what he was, and who had spent 6 years managing the specific loneliness of that decision with enough discipline that it had looked, from the outside, like sufficiency, who had been precise and careful, and had built elaborate systems of protection, and had not, despite all of it, protected himself from her. She had not been looking for him. He had not been looking for her. And here they were, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed 3 days before the rest of both their lives, entirely found. The decision requires revision, she said, using his words again. Yes. What does the revised version look like? He turned to face her, fully, the way he had in the kitchen at 4 a.m, with the coffee and the honest, ungoverned expression, and the first time she had understood that he was not managing the distance between himself and her anymore.
The revised version, he said, looks like whatever you and I decide it looks like. After the trial. In a conversation that happens outside of... He gestured at the room, the circumstances, the specific architecture of the last 6 weeks. All of this. And if I say I want the conversation to start now, she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression, an openness, a willingness, the look of a man who has given himself permission. Then it starts now, he said. She leaned her shoulder into his. He remained very still for exactly 1 moment. The moment of a man receiving something he has been waiting for. And then he put his arm around her. Slow, deliberate, complete. They sat like that until the coffee went cold, and then a little longer. And it was enough. It was precisely, entirely, more than enough. The day of the trial arrived the way consequential days always do, too early and without ceremony. The light through the hotel window was thin and grey, and Mara lay in the dark for a full minute before it and thought, today. Just that word. Just the fact of it. She showered. She dressed in the clothes Calloway had arranged. A dark blue suit, professional, structured. The kind of clothes that said, I am someone you should believe, and I have nothing to prove by saying so. She put her hair up. She looked in the mirror and had a very brief and very direct conversation with herself. The kind she'd been having her whole life in mirrors before difficult things. It ended, as it always did, with the straightened spine, the chin, her mother's instruction, delivered in the specific voice that meant, you are capable of this, and I am not going to insult you by telling you so. She picked up her bag. She went to the door. Nico was in the corridor when she opened it. He was in a full suit, dark navy, precisely pressed, completely himself, and he looked at her for a moment, with the expression she had catalogued hundreds of times now, from every angle and in every light, and she knew this one. This was the expression of someone who was feeling something they were choosing not to diminish by translating it into words. Ready? He said. Yes, she said. He rode with her in the federal car to the courthouse. Calloway was there, and 2 agents, and the morning was doing its morning things outside the windows. People going to work, a coffee cart on a corner, a woman walking a dog. All of it impossibly ordinary in contrast with what was happening inside the car. Nico sat beside her and said nothing, which was the right thing. She did not need words from him. She needed the specific gravity of his presence, the particular quality of his attention, which had been the most constant thing in her life for 6 weeks. She had that. She went. The courthouse was the particular kind of building designed to make you feel the weight of its institution. Tall ceilings, marble floors, the sounds of the space reverberating in ways that emphasized your smallness within it, and the correspondingly enormous scale of what it contained. She was taken through the secure entrance, as promised. She waited in a small room with Calloway and the attorney Park, who reviewed her statement one final time with the specific focus of someone who knows exactly which words are load-bearing. You'll be asked by the prosecutor first, Park said. Clear, direct. What you saw, when you saw it, how you know what you know. Then the defense. They will attempt to establish distance, time, lighting, emotional state, your proximity to the door. You are an event coordinator who was at the Meridian for professional reasons. You were unfamiliar with any of the parties involved.
You have no motive to testify falsely. Stay in that truth. I know, Mara said. You'll see Salvatore Caruso in that courtroom. I know, she said again. If you look at him, I'll look at him, Mara said. I'll look at him clearly. He looked at me clearly in that corridor, and I looked back, which is the only reason any of this exists. She paused. I'll be fine. Park nodded. In her expression, brief and controlled, something that was not quite admiration, but was what admiration looks like in a person who practices maintaining professional distance. The courtroom was quiet in the way that proceedings about to begin are quiet. A held breath, occupied by many people simultaneously, each performing their professional composure. The jury, in their 2 rows, studying everything with the specific attention of people who have been told their attention is the point. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses and an expression so composed it had become its own kind of statement. The prosecutor's table, orderly and prepared. The defense table. And at the defense table, Salvatore Caruso. She looked at him. She had promised herself she would, and she did, directly, without hesitation, without the dart and look away that nervousness produces. He was smaller than the man in her memory, which was what the context of a legal proceeding did to people. It reduced them, put them inside the architecture of accountability, stripped the specific power of proximity and darkness and choice. He was thin and dark-suited, and his eyes, she had remembered them as cold, had been afraid of that cold quality for 6 weeks, were not what she had expected. They were afraid and angry, which was worse than cold in some ways, and better in others. Afraid meant the situation had reached him. Angry meant it mattered. She took the stand. She was sworn in. She answered the prosecutor's questions in the order they were given, and she was careful and direct, and she did not embellish, and she did not perform. She said what she had seen, when she had seen it, what she had been wearing, and why she had been there, and what she had heard, and what she had then done. She said it in the voice of a woman who had spent 6 weeks becoming someone who could say it. The defense attorney was very good. He established the lighting, dim, indirect, nightclub blue. He established the distance, across a corridor, through a doorway, a fraction of a second before she ran. He questioned her emotional state, a woman who had just witnessed a violent act, in a state of fear, in conditions not designed for reliable observation. She answered every question. She answered them without anger, without theatre, with the specific flatness of truth. I saw what I saw. I know what I know. I can tell you the position of every person in that corridor, because I have seen it in my sleep every night for 6 weeks. Fear does not distort detail. Fear creates detail. You remember clearly the things that happened just before you ran. At one point, she and Salvatore Caruso looked at each other across the room. She held it. She did not look away. She watched him register that she was not going to break, that she had not broken in 6 weeks of being hunted, had not broken in a hotel room or a brownstone or a penthouse above a city that wanted her gone. And she watched the calculation in his face shift from assessment to something closer to recognition. He recognized what she was. He had recognized it in the corridor. He simply hadn't banked on it being this durable. She stepped down 40 minutes after she had stepped up. Calloway met her in the corridor with the expression of someone who has gotten what they needed and knows it. "That was accurate," she said. "It was accurate, which was what it needed to be." She sat in the small room and waited. Park came in 20 minutes later. "Salvatore's attorney is in conference with the prosecution," Park said. Her voice was very controlled. "There is a discussion about pleading." Mara looked at her. "The recorded evidence, combined with your testimony, the defense is looking for a way out of a trial they know they're losing." She sat with this. 6 weeks. 1 corridor. 1 broken heel. 1 question about a gluten allergy at table 7 that had rearranged everything. "Will it hold?" she asked.
"It's holding right now," Park said, "and strengthening." She closed her eyes. She sat in the room with the sound of the courthouse around her and the specific relief of something enormous beginning to resolve. Not finished, not concluded, but turning. The tide of it, perceptibly turning. She opened her eyes. She went to find Nico. He was in the corridor outside the small room, standing very still in the way that was his particular stillness. Not absence, not emptiness, but the complete presence of someone who is exactly where they intend to be. When she came through the door, he looked at her with everything unguarded. Completely, utterly, without a single layer of the careful management she had watched him maintain across 6 weeks. And she walked to him, and he put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and felt his arms tighten. And she breathed. "How did it go?" he said, very quietly, against her hair. "Well," she said, "it went well." His arms tightened further. "It's almost over," she said. "Yes," he said. Almost. The word they'd been living inside for 43 days. Almost, and then after, and then everything they had decided after was going to contain. She stayed in his arms for a moment that was longer than was strictly necessary, and precisely as long as she needed. Then she lifted her head. "Take me somewhere that isn't a courthouse," she said. He looked down at her with the ghost smile at full presence, wider than she'd seen it, actual warmth, the smile of a man who has decided to let things be as good as they are. "Yes," he said, "I know somewhere." Salvatore Caruso entered a plea agreement on the 4th day of the trial. The terms were ones she was briefed on briefly and did not need to carry in detail. She had given what she had to give, had said what she had seen, and the legal machinery from that point forward belonged to the people whose work it was. Calloway called her the afternoon of the plea and told her in his even, careful voice that the case was proceeding favourably, that her testimony had been determinative, that she was no longer in the specific and immediate danger she had been in for 47 days. He said it with the particular formality of someone delivering long-awaited news that has emotional weight they are professionally obligated not to perform. She said, "Thank you." She meant it. Vittorio Caruso, the patriarch, was arrested 2 weeks later on federal charges that drew substantially from the documentation Nico had spent 8 months building. The organization fractured in the way that hierarchical structures fracture when their centers collapse. Not immediately, not all at once, but with the inevitable slow momentum of a thing that has lost what was holding it together. The newspapers would cover it for months. She would read some of it and then stop reading, because her part in it was over, and she had learned, in 47 days of being inside someone else's world,
that knowing when you have done your part and can put a thing down is its own kind of wisdom. She went to Elena's for a week first. She needed to arrive somewhere that was simply hers before she figured out what came next.
Elena's guest room, with its lavender fabric softener and the stack of magazines that were always 6 weeks out of date, and the sounds of the building, neighbours, traffic, the radiator in the corner that knocked after midnight, was the most familiar configuration of ordinary life she could reach, and she went to it and let it hold her for 7 days. Elena fed her and asked careful questions and didn't ask others, which was the specific wisdom of someone who loves you enough to let you arrive, rather than extracting your arrival by force. On the third night, over wine at Elena's kitchen table, Mara told her about Nico. She started with the practical, the penthouse, the arrangement, the reason for all of it. Then she went further. The books, the tea, the blanket on the terrace chair, the piano in the dark room, the kitchen at 2 a.m. with the white shirt and the open buttons, the library, the fire, the 2 chairs, the garden in Milan, the not yet and the after, and the brown stone staircase at 2 a.m. with his blood on his hands and his forehead against hers. Elena was quiet for a long time. Her expression did a series of complicated and very legible things that Mara watched with the specific affection of someone who has known another person's face long enough to read it the way you read a familiar language. "He's still," Elena started. "Yes," Mara said. "And you?" "Yes," she said again. "I know. I've said every version of it to myself. I said it while it was happening, and I kept saying it, and none of it changed anything." She looked at her sister. "I know what he is. I know his world. I know what the complications look like." A pause. "I also know who he is. Those are not the same thing. They're in conversation. They're real. They're both things I'm taking seriously. But they're not the same." Elena looked at her for a long time. Then, quietly, "You look different." "I am different. Not bad different." Elena tilted her head, with the expression she got when she was seeing something clearly. "More settled. Like you've been through something enormous and come out the other side knowing exactly where your feet are." Mara thought about this, about the woman who had built a perimeter and called it a life, about the woman who had stood in a corridor in a nightclub and been pulled into something she hadn't chosen and had found, on the other side of the choosing she had done within it, that she was someone she recognized and respected. "I do know where my feet are," she said, "for the first time in a long time." "Is he going to be good to you?" "He already has been," she said, "in his specific and complicated way." Elena shook her head slowly, in the manner of a woman processing a great deal of information. Then, "Does he know you steal other people's wine when you think they're not looking?" "Not yet," Mara said. "Give it time," Elena said. She met Nico for the first time after the trial at a restaurant on the north side. Not his territory, not a place he owned, a place she had chosen, which felt important. Small and Italian and very ordinary, red tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, and the smell of garlic and something roasting in the back. The kind of restaurant that would have made his other life seem very far away. He was there when she arrived, and he stood when she came to the table, and she thought again, this is still alarming, this antiquated courtesy, and she hoped she never stopped finding it so, because the day she stopped finding it alarming would be the day it had become ordinary.
and she did not want this man to become ordinary to her. She wanted to go on finding him surprising. She suspected, having spent 47 days learning him, that she would. "Hi," she said. "Mara," he said. She sat, he sat. The red tablecloth and the wine bottle candle, and the restaurant full of ordinary people having ordinary evenings, and the extraordinary, ordinary fact of being here without any of the architecture of protection or strategy or managed distance or confinement. No Leo, no security rotation, no parameters, just a table and two people who had found each other in the specific way that some people find each other, not by looking, not by planning, but by being thrown into the same impossible situation and discovering, in it, something they hadn't known they needed. "This is different," she said. "Very," he agreed. She looked at him across the table. He was looking at her with that complete attention, but different now. Something in it had relaxed, had permission, was not managing itself. He was simply looking at her. He was here, and she was here, and neither of them was required to be anywhere else or anything other than what they were. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." "There's no arrangement," she said. "No federal favor. Nothing you owe anyone." "No," he agreed. "Just this." She picked up the menu. "I'm going to order something with rosemary." Something in his expression, the ghost smile, more than ghost now, properly there, the smile of a man who has decided to let himself have things. "Of course you are." They ate and they talked, and it was both entirely different from everything before it and entirely continuous. Because he was the same man, precise, careful, analytical, honest in the specific way that was more valuable than warmth, though he had warmth too. And she was the same woman, only larger, only more thoroughly herself, which was what 6 weeks inside an impossible situation had produced. Herself, clarified. He told her about the organization, where it was, what he was doing with it, the very deliberate choices he'd been making about what parts of it he intended to maintain and what parts he intended to let go. He was honest. He did not simplify and he did not dramatize. He laid it out with the same precision he brought to everything. And she listened and asked careful questions. Because this was going to be, she was committing to this knowledge, a life she needed to see clearly if she was going to move toward it with her eyes open. She was moving toward it with her eyes open. After dinner, they walked. November had become December. Chicago in December, with its particular cold and its lights strung between bare-branched trees along the streets. The lake invisible, but present in the quality of the air, in the specific edge that wind from the lake carries that is not quite like wind from anywhere else. He had a coat for her. Of course he did. She put it on. It smelled like him, the cedar-adjacent thing she had spent 47 days trying not to catalogue, and had catalogued anyway. She pulled it around her and looked at him. "The garden," she said. "Milan," he said. "Spring is 5 months away." "Yes." He looked at her. "Do you have plans for spring?" She looked at him, the street, the lights, his face in December. "I'm keeping them open," she said. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked along the water. The path that ran beside the lake was empty at this hour, or nearly, just the two of them, and the cold and the lights of the city reflected in the black water. And she thought about the last time she had been outside in Chicago, not observed from 40 floors up, but inside it, on the ground level of it. The city at her scale rather than below her. She had spent 6 weeks watching it from above, from the penthouse and the brownstone and the hotel, watching it go about its business without her. It looked different from inside. It looked from inside like hers. "Tell me something good," she said. He looked at her sidelong. The expression of someone who recognizes their own words returned to them, and who is pleased to have them returned. "The garden in Milan," he said. "Sunday mornings. Very small. Quiet that feels chosen rather than accidental." He paused. "And you, in it." She looked up at him. "You've been thinking about that?" "For some time," he admitted. She held his arm a little more firmly. "So have I." They walked until they were cold and then found a bar, small, warm, the kind of bar that exists to be warm in winter, its purpose purely that, and sat across from each other at a small table in the back, and she ordered the rosemary cocktail that she would always now associate with a nightclub and a red dress, and the first time she had understood that he was paying specific attention to her. And it tasted nothing like fear. It tasted like December and like afterward, and like the specific pleasure of being somewhere by choice. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I am not going to stop asking you questions," she said. "Even when you'd prefer I didn't. Even when the questions are inconvenient or involve things you've decided I don't need to know." "I know," he said. "And I'm not going to pretend the complications don't exist." "Good," he said. "I don't want you to." "But I also," she said, "am not going to be afraid of them. I spent my whole life building a perimeter against complicated things, and the complicated thing found me anyway on a Thursday night in November, and—" She paused. "I'm done with perimeters." He looked at her with his complete, particular attention. "What replaced them?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Clarity," she said. "I know what I want. I know who I am. I know what I'm willing to carry and what I'm not." She paused. "That's not a perimeter. That's a foundation." Something moved through his expression, that thing she had watched happen and develop and clarify for 47 days, the thing she had watched find its way to the surface of a man who had spent his adult life keeping the surface managed. It arrived now fully, without management, the open, uncomplicated, specifically him expression. "And I love you," she said, simply. The way she said things, simply. "I thought you should know that in a context that isn't a brownstone staircase at 2 a.m. He was quiet for a moment that was, she thought, the last moment before something was irrevocably true, the instant just before the door opens, which is different from all other instants. Then, "Ti amo," he said, entirely, specifically, without reservation or strategy or management. He looked at her across the small table in the warm bar in December. "Which remains, I want you to know, the most alarming thing that has ever happened to me." She laughed. Genuinely, the way she had laughed at his dinner table by the window weeks ago, when she had not laughed in days, and the laugh had surprised them both. "Good," she said. You should be alarmed. I am, he said. The smile, fully present, no ghost about it, the actual smile of a man who has given himself permission to have one. And I find I don't care. She looked at him. This precise and dangerous and careful and extraordinary man who had built his life around the management of distance and who was, right now, sitting across from her in a bar on a December night without any distance at all. Who had spent 8 months building something that would protect her before he knew she existed. Who had spent 47 days learning her with the complete attention he brought to everything, and who had said, "Ti amo," in a hallway at 2 a.m. with blood on his hands, and meant it so completely that even now, weeks later, she could feel the weight of it. She reached across the table and took his hand. He held it, completely, without management, without the considered deliberateness of earlier holdings. Just held it. As a man holds the hand of someone who is simply his, and whom he is simply. Outside, Chicago went about its business. The lights and the cold and the lake and the December city that she had been pulled out of and returned to, which was the same city and was also not. Because she was not the same woman who had answered her phone on a Thursday night in November and gone back into a service corridor to ask about a gluten allergy at table 7, and found the whole shape of her life changed by what she saw there. She was someone who had been inside the world's worst kind of danger and had come out knowing what she was made of. She was someone who had been kept by a man who had, in the end, not kept her at all, but simply been present, beside her, careful and honest, and sometimes infuriating, and always paying attention, one precious moment at a time, until the moments had added up to something she recognized as the rest of her life. She was Mara Vasquez. She was in love with a complicated and specific man, and she was not afraid of the complications, and she was going to Milan in the spring to sit in a small garden near the Navili on a Sunday morning and read Calvino out loud, while the city went quietly about the business of being beautiful. She was, for the first time in a life spent building small and careful, ready for something large.